Good evening, everyone. Tonight we journey into a world draped in fog, where the torches of castle walls flicker like uncertain stars in a sky heavy with silence. Picture yourself walking along a damp cobblestone path, your breath fogging in the chill air, the sound of hooves echoing faintly in the distance. In the darkness ahead, a lone figure stands at the threshold of power, a man whose name would be etched not in gold but in dread. Once you enter his realm, you may find you can't escape it. So before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy what we're building here together. I also invite you to leave a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always a quiet joy to know where our stories are finding their home. Now turn down the lights, maybe turn on a small fan for a gentle background hum, and let's begin tonight's journey. In the year 1431, in a mountainous region caught between empires and ambition, a child was born into a troubled house. His name was Orek III, and from the moment of his birth, his life was anything but secure. The Principality of Varnov, his homeland, stood like a brittle shield between two great powers, the sprawling Ottoman Empire to the south and the restless kingdom of Haldun to the north. His father, Orek the Elder, held the throne with strained fingers, balancing alliances like a juggler with broken wrists. It was during this fraught period that young Orek's fate took a sharp and permanent turn. In a political agreement crafted out of necessity more than trust, his father surrendered him and his younger brother as hostages to the Ottoman court. The move was strategic, a way to secure Varnov's compliance as a vassal state, but to the young boy, it was nothing short of exile. He was not mistreated, at least not in the traditional sense. The palace he lived in gleamed with marble, gold, and ceremony, yet behind the veils of perfumed silks and courteous bows lay a world cold with calculation. In the court of Sultan Murad II, Orek watched punishments unfold with chilling precision. Here, mercy was rare, discipline was final. He witnessed impalement for the first time, not on a battlefield, but as a lesson, a show of power, swift and unavoidable. These early years did not break Orek, they forged him. Years passed, his father was assassinated, his home fractured into chaos, and when Orek returned to Varnov in 1448, he did not return as a boy. He came back as a man who had seen the hollow underside of power and learned how to fill it. His homeland greeted him not with open arms, but with bickering lords, starving peasants, and the ever-looming threat of foreign invasion. Yet Orek saw clearly. He did not reach for kindness to unite his kingdom, he reached for fear. The nobles of Varnov, proud and fragmented, had grown too comfortable with playing kingmakers. Orek invited them to a grand gathering. A feast of peace, he called it, a celebration of unity. The invitations were gilded, the wine imported, the music prepared. As the guests dined and toasted their prince's return, soldiers in black surrounded the hall. At Orek's signal, calm, almost bored, they descended. No noble left the hall alive. What had begun as a banquet ended as a purge. The bodies were dragged outside, lifted high upon sharpened stakes, and displayed across the city's perimeter. Thus began Orek's reign, not with an oath, but with silence, not with cheers, but with the wet sound of spears through flesh. In the weeks that followed, word spread swiftly across the valleys and rivers. A new prince ruled Varnov, and he did not ask for loyalty. He demanded it. The streets grew quiet. Markets reopened, but whispers ran beneath the surface like current beneath ice. Villagers avoided the castle gates where rows of stake traders swayed in the wind. Crime dwindled, not from conscience, but from sheer terror. Orek's methods, brutal as they were not random. They were strategic. Each public punishment was a message carved into the memory of those who watched. He did not shout his authority. He let the dead do it for him. And though the nobles of neighboring lands whispered of barbarity, they also hesitated before provoking Varnov. His infamy grew beyond the borders. Emissaries from faraway courts came to treat with him, eyes wide and back straight, for none wanted to share the fate of those who had once doubted him. One such envoy, an ambassador from the southern lands, refused to remove his ceremonial headwear, citing custom and faith. Aurek, unmoved, ordered the cloth nailed to the man's skull, stating plainly, "Then let it never leave you." The ambassador died without a sound. Another message, nailed not just to a man, but to the world. Despite his cruelty, or perhaps because of it, Aurek's rule brought an eerie kind of order. Banditry vanished, tribute flowed. Even foreign merchants resumed travel through the region, knowing that while the prince's laws were severe, they were predictable. Break them, and you would be punished. Obey, and you were left alone. Still, Aurek was not content with stability. He was a man of vision, and in his vision, weakness had no place. He expanded fortresses, improved roads, and maintained a network of informants that reached into every tavern and monastery. His spies didn't need to listen to speeches. They watched for hesitation, for unease, for glances that lingered a moment too long. In private, it's said that Aurek rarely smiled. When he did, the court fell silent, for his smile rarely meant pleasure. It meant someone had erred. And soon, that someone would be gone. Aurek III ruled Varnov not just with an iron fist, but with a sculptor's hand. He shaped fear into policy, discipline into tradition. The people learned not just to obey, but to revere him. They called him the Nail Prince, not for his tools, but because he never let go. But beneath this ironclad order, something darker stirred. For all the roads paved and enemies vanquished, there were stories. Low murmurs behind closed doors, of prisoners who screamed without end, of halls beneath the palace never touched by sunlight, of Aurek himself walking among the stakes at night, silent and watchful like a shepherd counting his sheep. Whether those stories were truth or legend, it hardly mattered. What mattered was that people believed them. And in Varnov, belief was enough to keep a dagger in its sheath, a complaint buried in silence. This was not a fairy tale. This was not a parable. This was how power held its breath. And Aurek was the one who taught it to breathe. The chill of power is not always found in the clash of swords or the roar of battle. Sometimes it lingers in silence, between stone walls, behind closed doors, in the space where fear breathes. And in the years following his bloody ascension, Prince Aurek III perfected the art of ruling through silence. No proclamation could inspire more obedience than the simple knowledge that the stakes were always ready, and the prince never forgot. The nobility of Varnov had been decimated in one night. Those who remained pledged loyalty with trembling hands and forced smiles. Yet Aurek understood that fear alone, while effective, could rot if not reinforced. So he rebuilt his court, not with seasoned aristocrats, but with outsiders, men of low birth but high ambition, foreign advisors, loyal only to Aurek himself. He elevated commoners to positions of authority, dismantling the old hierarchies that had once undermined his father. It was a new Varnov, and Aurek made sure everyone knew it. Among his closest was a man named Dragan, a former merchant turned magistrate. Sharp, unrelenting, and utterly devoted, Dragan administered Aurek's justice like a physician removing a diseased limb. Punishments were swifter now, but no less theatrical. Criminals were not just executed, they were displayed. Their stories were whispered in the markets, their names scrubbed from history. All that remained was the echo of their fate, a warning. Aurek's reach extended beyond the capital. He sent emissaries to the borderlands, not with gifts, but with lists of expected grain, labor, and men. He introduced quotas and schedules, enforced not by suggestion, but by presence. Where governors failed, they were replaced. If they resisted, they were impaled. The message was consistent. Order was not optional. It was destiny. Yet amid this grim efficiency, something unexpected emerged. Varnov began to prosper. With roads safe and trade routes cleared of bandits, merchants returned, markets swelled. Foreign dignitaries, though wary, acknowledged Aurek's rule with carefully worded letters. The prince responded with equal care, stern but formal, never forgetting a slight, never failing to exploit a weakness. Still, Aurek was not blind to the fragility of what he built. Peace, he knew, was not the absence of violence. It was the careful management of potential violence. And so he invested in his army. Not the bloated, disorganized militias of his father's time, but a disciplined force drilled daily, paid regularly, and watched constantly. They were not just soldiers. They were the hands of his will. Training fields were built near the capital. Black-clad men marched in unison across the hills. Villagers watched with a mix of awe and dread. These were not men who fought for glory. They fought because Auric commanded it, and in return he gave them purpose, food, rank, fearsome respect. Auric also ordered the construction of signal towers along the main roads, small stone columns equipped with braziers that could relay fire signals across the kingdom in hours. Communication, he believed, was a weapon more potent than steel. With speed came certainty, with certainty, control. But even as Varnov's internal affairs hardened into a machine, threats beyond its borders stirred. To the south, the Sultan of the Empire, the same who had once held Auric as a boy, was not pleased by the prince's growing strength. Rumors reached the capital. Troop movements, increased patrols along the river frontier, strange ambassadors asking pointed questions. Auric responded not with panic, but with preparation. He summoned cartographers and scholars, pored over old records and spy reports. He reinforced the river fortresses, ordered new ballistas carved and trebuchets repaired. Every blacksmith, carpenter, and mason found themselves swept into a frenzy of readiness. For weeks, the sound of hammers rang louder than church bells. Yet even as he prepared for war, Auric never let go of his preferred tactic, fear. In a calculated gesture, he had a group of captured raiders, bandits from across the southern border, paraded through the capital. Then, in the central square, he ordered them impaled in front of the people. The stakes were taller than any before, the executions slower. He watched from a balcony, expressionless. When asked why he made it so public, he replied only, "So their screams travel faster than any scout." And travel they did, stories of Auric's cruelty, embellished by distance, sharpened by imagination, spread across borders like wildfire. Children in far villages whispered his name before bed, fearing he might appear in their sleep. Even kings began to hesitate when speaking of him. But cruelty alone does not sustain a reign. Auric knew this, and so he cloaked his terror in ritual, his executions in law. Every sentence was backed by decree, every punishment sanctioned by a court, however staged. He created layers of bureaucracy to legitimize his will. A paper fortress around a blood-soaked throne. He rarely appeared in public. When he did, it was always with precision. His cloak a perfect cut, his crown minimal but unmistakable. He spoke softly, choosing his words like daggers. Crowds listened in silence, not from reverence but survival. They learned quickly that applause came from instinct, not belief. And still, the land grew stable. Harvests improved. Trade flourished. Roads held. It was a paradox. Beneath the heel of a tyrant, Varnov was blooming. Yet everyone knew, or thought they knew, that one misstep, one whispered insult, one poorly timed joke could be the last. There were whispers, of course, in taverns, in dark corners of monasteries, that Auric was not merely ruthless but broken, that he no longer trusted anyone, not even himself, that he paced his hallways at night, speaking to no one, that he wrote letters he never sent, that he kept a ledger of names, thousands long, of those who might betray him one day. And then there was the matter of the prisoners. Beneath the castle, in chambers untouched by light, rumors spoke of cells so deep that screams could not reach the surface, of devices unthinkable in their design, used not for confession but for instruction. The truth of these stories was never confirmed, but the fear they evoked was real enough. Auric never denied them, he simply smiled. And when he smiled, people prayed. In time, some began to call him not the Nail Prince, but the Watcher, for it was said he missed nothing, that he heard secrets before they were spoken, that walls themselves betrayed those who schemed, and so Varnov endured, prosperous, ordered, and utterly still, like a forest waiting for a storm, like breath held indefinitely, like a kingdom ruled not by love nor even hate, but by the pure, unwavering certainty that the prince was always watching. Dawn broke like a blade through frost, thin, cold, and silent. The hills around Varnov remained cloaked in mist, their outlines blurring like forgotten memories. In the highest chamber of the citadel, Prince Auric III stood before a wide window, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. Below, the capital stirred slowly to life. Carts creaked along cobblestone streets, blacksmiths began hammering in rhythm, smoke curled from early hearths. All of it moved under his shadow, and he liked it that way. But even in this moment of stillness, he knew peace was a performance, and the next act had already begun. Whispers had reached him from the south. The Sultan, once a distant phantom of childhood captivity, had grown restless. Varnov's defiance had not gone unnoticed. Aurek's refusal to pay tribute, his executions of Ottoman envoys, and his brutal display of military readiness had been interpreted, as intended, as a provocation. Scouts reported caravans of soldiers moving through the forests of the lower Danish plains. No declarations had been made, but declarations, Aurek believed, were for the naive. The drums of war were already beating, muffled but insistent. He turned from the window and approached the large oak table that dominated the room. Upon it lay maps, old, creased, and marked with meticulous notations. Rivers inked in blue, paths of retreat etched in faded red, fortresses circled in black wax. Aurek examined them the way a jeweler studies a flawed diamond, searching for weaknesses not to fix but to exploit. He summoned his generals. The three men entered the chamber with practiced precision. General Tomas, oldest among them, bore a limp earned from decades on horseback. His face was lined, his eyes wary. Beside him was Lucien, sharp-eyed and silent, a man of few words and fewer smiles. The third, younger than the rest, was Commander Halden, a recent elevation from the border guard. Brave, perhaps too eager, Aurek motioned for them to sit. "There is movement," he said without preamble, "along the southern edge of the river near Red Hollow." Tomas nodded grimly. "They'll test us first. Raiding, torching border farms, nothing official." "They're not ready for full invasion," added Lucien, "but they're circling." "Then we strike first," Halden offered quickly. "Push into their scouting lines. Show them we're not afraid." Aurek looked at him for a long moment, not unkindly, but with the weight of someone measuring not just the words spoken, but the roots they grew from. "No," he said. "We don't strike first. Not yet." He pointed to the map, to a narrow gorge between two wooded ridges near the old stone bridge at Draxenford. "We let them come, then we trap them here." Tomas raised an eyebrow. "Risky. If they send cavalry—" "They won't," Aurek interrupted. "Not in winter. The terrain is mud. They'll come light and arrogant." He outlined his plan with quiet precision. The use of false retreats, hidden caltrops beneath river silt, archers in tree lines, and fire pits disguised beneath moss. It wasn't battle Aurek prepared for, it was execution. When the generals left, he remained at the table alone. Outside, the morning had brightened, but his mind remained in shadows. War was not a matter of conquest to him. It was ritual, an assertion of dominance through pattern and memory. He had seen the Ottomans fight as a boy. He knew their formations, their weaknesses, their confidence. What they didn't know, what they couldn't yet understand, was how deeply he had changed. Later that day, Aurek descended into the lower wing of the castle. Here, past rows of archways and beneath torch-lit stone halls, lay the council chamber, not of nobles, but of keepers. Men and women who managed the quieter machinery of rule, spies, message-bearers, code readers, and archivists. Among them sat Elise, his master of letters. "Elise," he said, stepping forward, "you know the southern codes?" She rose and bowed lightly. "Every last one, Your Grace." "I want 3 letters sent," he continued. "One to Lord Pharos in Northgate. Tell him to double the grain shipments. Another to the mine stewards in the Black Hills. Remind them that we reward loyalty, but we punish delay. And the third," he paused, watching her, "to the Sultan's camp through the merchant channels. No seal, no signature, just a note. We remember every day beneath your roof, and we do not forget." Elise blinked, then nodded once. "As you wish." This was Aurek's true strength, not just in force, but in memory. He understood that fear is not just a reaction to violence, but to suggestion. A silent letter, a delayed shipment, a merchant's glance. These too were weapons. 2 nights later, his preparations were tested. A group of riders appeared at the southern village of Branta, half a day's ride from the river. Dressed in merchant garb, but poorly disguised, they lingered too long, asked too many questions. The village reeve, trained under Aurek's new order, sent word immediately. By dawn, the riders were captured, not killed, not yet. Aurek had them brought to the citadel. In the throne hall, flanked by black-cloaked guards, the prisoners knelt. One of them trembled visibly. Another stared defiantly. Aurek sat high above them, his expression unreadable. "You were told," he said softly, "to approach with care." The defiant one spat. "We're traitors. You have no proof." Aurek nodded once. Then he signaled. A pair of guards stepped forward, dragging something behind them. A bundle. They dropped it with a dull thud. The cloth unraveled, revealing a satchel stuffed with gold coins, each stamped with the Sultan's mark. Not traded. Minted. No one spoke. "You are not messengers," Aurek continued. "You are warnings. So let me reply." He stood, descending the steps with measured calm. He did not need to raise his voice. His words carried weight enough. "Go back," he said, pointing to the trembling one. "Tell your master that I remember the walls of his palace, the color of the tiles, the sound of the chains. I remember them all." The prisoner nodded desperately. "And you," Aurek said to the defiant one, "you will stay." The guards took him, quietly. There was no scream, just the echo of footsteps. The message was sent. And as it crossed borders carried by the frightened and the maimed, it did not lose clarity. Aurek III was no longer the boy in the Sultan's shadow. He was the man in every shadow. And he was waiting. The snows came early that year. By mid-October, the mountain passes to the east of Varnov were already buried beneath a thick quilt of white. Frost coated every window pane, and the air hung heavy with silence, the kind that comes before something sharp. In the castle, servants moved more quickly now, footsteps brisk, voices hushed. Outside, guards wrapped their cloaks tighter, fingers stiff on spear shafts. War was no longer a rumor. It was a horizon growing darker with each passing day. Prince Aurek III, however, remained composed. He had waited for this, prepared for it, fed it like a gardener coaxing bloom from thorn. In the upper war room, he stood again before the vast map table, joined now not only by his generals but by scholars, tacticians, and scouts recently returned from the borderlands. News had come from the south. An Ottoman detachment had crossed the lower Danish River, probing defenses under the guise of a merchant patrol. Another caravan was reportedly spotted 2 days later, traveling under moonlight, an unusual tactic for legitimate trade. "They're measuring us," Lucien murmured, his gloved finger tracing the road to Red Hollow. "Looking for weaknesses." "They won't find any," Aurek replied, his voice level, "but they'll convince themselves otherwise. That's when they'll commit." General Tomas, sipping from a clay mug, nodded grimly. "And then we remind them what mistake means." Aurek didn't smile. He rarely did. But his silence was more potent than most men's laughter. He dismissed the council and descended to the central courtyard where the first divisions of the Varnovian Black Guard were drilling. Despite the cold, the men moved with practiced discipline, formations turning like the gears of a clock, shields raised, spears level. No battle was won by shouting, Aurek had taught them. Victory belonged to those who made the fewest mistakes and remembered the most pain. As he passed, soldiers straightened. They said nothing. They had learned that praise from the prince did not come in words. It came in permission, to live, to fight, to rise. From the courtyard, Aurek made his way to the forge, not for ceremony. He went often, inspecting the weapons, the armor, the distribution of iron. Blacksmiths bowed as he entered, their faces coated with soot and sweat. One handed him a newly finished short blade, balanced, dark metal, finely carved hilt. He weighed it in his hand, nodded once. "How many like this?" 57 ready, your grace, the smith replied. "Another 40 by week's end." Aurek handed it back. The smith blinked. "By week's end?" "Yes," Aurek said. "Your sons will help." The man opened his mouth to object, then thought better. "Yes, your grace." Every detail mattered. Every piece had a place. And Aurek would ensure no part was left wanting. That night, as the first snowstorm of the season rolled across the capital, Aurek stood in his private chamber, the fire crackling low, his hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial dagger gifted long ago by a transient ambassador. A relic now, its purpose spent. Still, he kept it near, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. Across the room, Elise entered quietly. "The merchant lines have confirmed receipt," she said. "The Sultan's court has seen your message." And? No reply, but she paused, producing a rolled parchment. This arrived by courier an hour ago, unmarked, but the seal is Eastern silk, burned edges, a practice among their whisperers. Auric opened it, reading in silence. A single phrase had been written in careful script. Then let the river run red. He folded the parchment, placed it in the flames, and watched it curl into ash. So it was decided. Auric summoned the inner circle before sunrise. Inside the vaulted chamber beneath the west wing, where voices did not echo, he laid out the final sequence of plans. The Ottoman strike would likely aim for the fortress at Draxen Ford, a narrow crossing, tempting in its apparent vulnerability. Auric had ensured it seemed under-garrisoned. He had even pulled back patrols to encourage their approach. "They believe we're thin here," Lucian said, tapping the map. "And we are," Auric agreed, "but not weak." Beneath the fortress, hidden within a false granary, 30 black guard soldiers waited, armed with oil, kindling, and heavy bows. In the adjacent forest, another 50 marksmen sat in silence, snow gathering on their cloaks. At Auric's order, they would allow the enemy to cross halfway before sealing the path behind them with fire. Trapped between water and arrow, the invaders would have no retreat, only instruction. The plan was brutal, surgical, but war was never a negotiation, not to Auric. As the sun rose, barely piercing the clouded sky, the first scout arrived, panting, his cloak torn. "They've moved," he gasped. 500 strong, at least. Light cavalry and skirmishers. They'll reach the ford by midday. No alarms were sounded, no bells, just nods, movements, orders relayed quietly through runners and signal flags. The soldiers moved like river currents, silent, steady, inevitable. By noon, Auric stood atop the north tower, the wind sharp against his cheek, the world below dusted white. In the distance, he could see them, figures crossing the valley, the faint shimmer of steel. The Ottomans had taken the bait. He waited. From this height, he saw the moment it changed. The enemy riders dismounted, their lead scouts advancing cautiously across the wooden bridge. Then came the main column, confident, purposeful. Then, fire. The false granary erupted. Flames leapt into the sky, smoke curling like a serpent. A moment later, arrows rained from the trees, precise, unyielding. The bridge, slick with oil, ignited in a wall of flame, cutting off retreat. Screams rose but did not carry far in the snow. Auric did not cheer. He did not move. He simply watched. When it was over, he turned from the tower and made his way down. He passed through the halls without a word, down the long spiral stair to the keep's base, where a single rider waited, mud-splattered, shivering. "Ride to their camp," Auric said. "Tell them what happened. Don't lie. Don't embellish. Just tell them what you saw, every detail." The messenger nodded. "And when you finish," Auric added, "say this. We did not start this fire, but we know how to tend it." The rider bowed, then vanished into the storm. Behind him, Auric stood still, not victorious, not cruel, just certain, and sometimes that was worse. Winter deepened its grip on the land, spreading silence like a second skin over the hills of Varnov. Forests grew still. Rivers slowed beneath their icy crusts. Even the wind, once so eager to tear through valley and peak, seemed to hold its breath. But inside the capital, the pulse of purpose beat stronger than ever. War had begun, not in the clash of grand armies, but in calculated fire and frozen blood. Prince Auric III did not celebrate the destruction at Draxen Ford. There were no feasts, no public declarations of triumph. Instead, he let silence speak. The wreckage of the burned bridge remained untouched, visible to all who traveled the southern routes. Charred beams still jutted from the river and blackened armor littered the banks. Crows gathered in the trees above, watching like sentinels. It was a warning, but warnings, Auric knew, were only useful if they preceded something worse. He met again with his council in the west chamber of the citadel, a room made for war, windowless, walled with maps and shelves of scrolls detailing old campaigns, treaties, betrayals. With his generals seated, Auric stood before a fresh chart of the region, newly inked with the enemy's known positions. Small red stones marked the forward Ottoman detachments. Black ones denoted Varnovian counterforces. "The Sultan will escalate," Auric said. "He cannot afford hesitation now. He must respond." "He'll send more than scouts," Tomas murmured. "He'll send a full column, 10,000, maybe more. Lucian, ever the quiet one, tapped a region northeast of the Danish River. They'll come through here next. The Valley of Sfortified. They'll assume it's our weakest path. It is, Halden said. No fortresses, barely a garrison. Exactly, Auric replied, which is why we make it look like an open door. And so the next piece was set. Orders spread through the ranks like cold wind under a door. From the capital to the smallest outposts, preparations began. Supplies were moved at night. Decoy camps were built to confuse enemy scouts. Livestock was relocated. Villages along the Valley of Syra were quietly evacuated, their homes left standing, hearths still warm, bait for the bold. But it was not just the outer provinces that stirred. Within the capital, Auric's internal apparatus moved with equal intensity. Elise, his master of letters, doubled the surveillance of the noble houses. Those who had once served under Auric's father, many now disgruntled or quietly nostalgic, were watched more closely. Letters were intercepted. Conversations repeated by paid servants. A single whispered complaint could summon an invitation to the Citadel's lower levels, a place from which few returned. Auric believed in loyalty, but he believed more in insurance. He also believed in symbols. 2 days after the burning at Draxon Ford, he summoned a sculptor from the city's artisan quarter. The man, gray-bearded and hunched with years of delicate carving, arrived with trembling hands. "I want a statue," Auric told him, at the southern gate. "Of what, your grace?" "A flame, tall, carved in black stone." The sculptor hesitated. "A flame? Burning?" "Yes, let the stone itself show movement, smoke rising, tendrils curling. And beneath it," Auric paused, "engrave nothing, let them wonder." The statue was raised within a week. Travelers passed beneath it uneasily, and rumors bloomed. Some claimed it was a tribute to the dead, others said it was a threat made permanent. The ambiguity served Auric well. Meanwhile, the Valley of Syra waited. The enemy moved just as predicted. Scouts returned with reports. A large column had departed from the Ottoman frontier fortress at Kashgar, estimated at 12,000 strong. Cavalry, archers, engineers, and supply wagons. No siege engines, suggesting a fast campaign, likely expecting minimal resistance. "They'll march straight into the valley," Lucian said. "They'll set up a temporary camp before crossing the ridge." "We let them," Auric replied, "and then we close the valley behind them." It was not a new tactic, but few had the patience or the ruthlessness to make it effective. In the hills flanking Syra, Auric positioned the 3rd and 5th Varnovian divisions. Light infantry and trained archers, hidden in high passes, prepared not to confront, but to collapse. Timber had already been weakened along the path behind the valley. At the signal, entire slopes would be loosed in controlled landslides, not to bury the enemy, but to cage them in. Auric had no intention of winning a battle in Syra. He meant to trap an army. As the enemy drew near, the valley fell into a feigned sleep. Campfires were lit. Sentries remained visible but sparse. When the Ottoman scouts approached, they found no defenses, just a narrow, quiet stretch of land and what appeared to be fear. By nightfall, they had moved in, and in the morning, the hills fell. It was not thunder, it was worse. Rolling, grinding, snapping earth. Trees toppled, rocks tumbled with the weight of mountains, paths vanished. Retreat was gone, and then came the fire. From the cliffs, barrels of oil rolled down into the basin. Torches followed. Flames roared across the dry underbrush, catching tents and wagons before the soldiers could form up. Arrows descended like rain. The smoke rose so high it was seen from the capital. Auric watched it from the same tower where he had observed Draxon Ford. He said nothing. His hands were behind his back, his eyes steady. In the aftermath, no songs were sung. The wounded were taken, not killed. Those who surrendered were marched in silence back to the capital, where they were paraded through the streets, not to shame them, but to remind the people of what vigilance could earn. Among the prisoners was a young officer, no older than 20, with eyes like polished iron. He stared at Auric without fear as he was brought before the prince. "I led no charge," he said. "I gave no order." "But you wore the colors," Auric replied, "and you crossed the line." The young man held his gaze. "Wouldn't you have done the same?" Auric didn't answer. Instead, he turned to a guard. Take him to the monastery, he said. Feed him, let him write to his family, then send him home. The room fell silent. Your Grace? The guard asked. Let him tell the story, Auric said. Exactly as it happened. That night the boy was given pen and ink. He wrote until dawn, and when he left, he carried no wounds. Only memory. Memory, Auric believed, was the most dangerous weapon of all, and he had just loaded it. The boy's letter traveled faster than any army. By the time it reached the Sultan's court, hidden in the folds of silk, passed hand to hand among whispering courtiers, the tale had already grown into something else. It was no longer just a report of defeat. It was a mirror held up to every general's fear, every ruler's hesitation. 12,000 men lost in a single valley, trapped, not by strength, but by understanding, and worse, released, some of them, so they could speak of it. That, the courtiers whispered, was the work of a man who didn't just want victory. He wanted memory to do the rest, and Auric knew it. In the high halls of Varnov, the prince returned to quietness. No new raids, no public declarations. The fire had burned, and now he let the smoke linger. Soldiers were returned to their posts. The capital resumed its rhythm. Grain was stored, roads were cleared. Nobles who had once questioned him now bowed lower, their letters more florid, their voices thinner. The silence once born of fear had transformed into reverence, cold but enduring. But Auric, in his solitude, understood what others could not. This was only the beginning. He spent his evenings alone now, walking the long upper corridor of the citadel, the one with windows overlooking every cardinal direction. From here, he could see the hills where the 3rd Division trained, the rooftops of the capital, the distant smoke from rural chimneys. It was not a place of grandeur, it was a place of vigilance. He paced it not for comfort, but to feel the pulse of the kingdom beneath his feet. Elise visited him one evening as the sky dimmed to indigo. They're shifting their forces, she said, pulling men from the southern coastal garrisons, reinforcing the interior routes. They're learning, Auric murmured. They're afraid. He turned, looking at her through the dim torchlight. Good, but that won't last. Fear decays, memory fades. We need something more. She nodded. Something permanent. And with that, the next campaign began, not on the battlefield, but in parchment and ink. Auric issued a decree that spread swiftly through every village, town, and holding. A census of loyalty. Every landowner, merchant, priest, and magistrate was to swear fealty to the crown of Varnov in writing, their names inked in black and pressed with blood seal. It was not about allegiance. It was about records. A kingdom, Auric believed, must know itself before it can defend itself. Some resisted, quietly, others hesitated. He gave them time, just enough for them to think he was lenient. Then the first punishments arrived, not with soldiers, but with silence. Their names disappeared from court documents. Their access to trade was revoked. Their sons were passed over for officer appointments. And when they asked why, they received no answer, only a copy of the decree with their names circled in red. None hesitated after that. But Auric did not seek obedience for its own sake. He had another purpose. Among the thousands of declarations returned to the capital, he looked for patterns. Who pledged first? Who delayed? Who cited illness or confusion? Who used cautious language? And who swore with fervor? It was not signatures he collected, it was risk. And with that, he redrew the invisible map of Varnov's loyalties, one no enemy could ever see. One name, however, caught his eye, Baron Morel of Ostavin. The Baron had once fought beside Auric's father, then faded into rural obscurity after the purges. His name had not appeared in any court document in over a decade, and yet his declaration came early, too early, flawlessly worded, too perfect. Auric sent no reply. Instead, he sent 3 riders. They arrived at Ostavin under cover of fog, no banners, no announcement. They did not speak to the Baron. They spoke to his cooks, his stable hands, his clerks. They asked no questions. They simply listened. And when they returned, their report was brief. The Baron has been hosting merchants from the coast, foreigners, quietly. He trains men at night. He does not speak Auric's name aloud. Auric read the report, folded it carefully, and burned it. 3 days later, he rode out. No escort, no armor, just a dark cloak and his personal horse, a gray stallion named Brecht. He arrived at Ostavin as the sun fell, casting long shadows across the Baron's manor, a structure more ostentatious than most had remembered. Guards stood at the gate. They recognized him, barely managing to kneel. "I've come for supper," Auric said. No one dared refuse. Baron Morel met him at the door, face pale, smile tight. "Your Grace, spare me," Auric interrupted. "We'll dine in your study. I dislike large halls." Within the manor, the fire crackled nervously. Servants moved like ghosts. The Baron poured wine with unsteady hands. Auric did not drink. They ate in silence, stew and dark bread. No conversation until the final bite. Then Auric leaned forward. "Do you remember my father?" The Baron hesitated. I served him, faithfully." "I recall," Auric said. "And when he died, where were you?" A pause. "I retreated. The capital was volatile." "Volatile," Auric echoed, tasting the word. "And now? I've returned. My loyalty is renewed." "Loyalty," Auric said, standing, "is not something one renews like a tax. It's not a cloak to wear when the wind changes. It's a blade, either sharp or broken." Baron Morel opened his mouth, but no words came. "I will leave now," Auric said. "There will be no execution, no spectacle. I want you to remain exactly where you are." The Baron blinked. "Your Grace, you will continue to host, to train, to whisper, and you will do so knowing that I let you, that every step you take is seen, every word weighed, every breath counted." He stepped toward the door, then paused. "And when the time comes, when the line is crossed, I will not send soldiers. I will come myself, again, and you will not see me until I'm standing where I am now." He left without another word. That night, Auric returned to the capital beneath a sky heavy with stars. He rode in silence, wind cutting against his cloak. Behind him, Ostavin sat quietly, and within it, Baron Morel stared into his fireplace, wine untouched, the stew grown cold, his hands shaking long after the prince was gone. Auric knew the power of fear, but more than that, he knew the power of being remembered, especially by those who wanted to forget. The stars above Varnov seemed sharper in winter, piercing, silent, and distant, like the eyes of ancient gods watching a kingdom slowly tighten its grip on itself. In the capital, life moved with a quiet discipline. Markets still bustled, bells still rang from cathedral towers, and children still laughed in snow-covered streets. But beneath the surface, something had changed. People spoke more softly, doors were closed a little quicker. And when Prince Auric III's name was mentioned, even in praise, it was followed by silence, as though the air itself demanded a pause. Auric was not unaware of this. He had designed it. He believed that peace without vigilance was just delay. So while others saw calm, he saw opportunity, the perfect time to reinforce the foundations of what he had built. Not through force this time, but through structure. He summoned Elise and the head architect of the kingdom, a hunched, soft-spoken man named Coron, to his private chambers. "We will begin construction," Auric said, standing over a newly drawn diagram. "Not a monument, a system." Coron blinked. "Of what nature, Your Grace?" "A tower," Auric replied. "No, a network of towers, one in every province, visible from the main road, each equipped with signal fires, pigeon lofts, and messengers' quarters, all connected, all under one code." Elise leaned forward. "A permanent chain of communication." "More than that," Auric said, tapping the map. "A nerve system. So when the time comes, this kingdom moves as one body." Coron bowed, hesitating only slightly. "It will take years to complete." "Then we begin this year," Auric replied. "I will not die with my kingdom deaf and blind." Work began immediately. The first tower rose out of the capital near the old Roman road. Made of dark stone and ironwood, it stood 3 stories high, with a brazier on the roof and a sealed chamber at its heart. Inside, messages were logged, copied, and archived. Each tower keeper was sworn to secrecy, trained in the new codes devised by Elise's scribes. As news of the construction spread, whispers bloomed. Some believed the towers were for defense, others said they were prisons or places where spies were trained. Auric did not correct them. Ambiguity was useful. What mattered was that people looked at the towers and thought. That alone was power. At the same time, Auric turned his attention north, to the mountain passes. The borderlands had long been neglected, difficult terrain, poor soil, populations too sparse to raise concern. But Auric saw what others didn't, The forgotten always became dangerous, not in rebellion, but in silence. He sent emissaries, engineers, surveyors, and clerks, not soldiers. At first, their mission was simple: rebuild the roads. Not military paths, but trade routes, widened and reinforced. Tolls were lowered, inns were subsidized. Blacksmiths were offered royal contracts if they relocated. In a matter of months, what had been wild became known. But with knowledge came consequence. One of the engineers sent north, a man named Dalver, never returned. His body was found at the bottom of a ravine, throat cut, his records missing. Auric received the report in his study. He read it once, set it down, and said only, "Find who did it." Lucian, silent as always, took the task. Within 3 days, they had the name. Varin Coast, a former border guard dismissed 5 years ago for dereliction of duty. He had vanished into the highlands, living off stolen goods and hiring himself out to smugglers and outlaws. A small man, a forgotten man, but not anymore. Auric ordered no army, no march. Instead, he rode north alone, disguised as a simple traveler, with Lucian trailing quietly behind. They arrived in the village of Eltara after sunset, where Coast was last seen. The locals were hesitant, avoiding eye contact. Fear hung in the air like smoke. Auric waited until nightfall, then knocked on the door of the inn. Coast answered. He was older than expected, hollow-eyed, a knife tucked at his belt. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice gruff. "You already have," Auric said, stepping inside. The door closed. What passed between them in that small room was not written down. No guards, no witnesses, just two men, a fire, and a reckoning. When the door reopened, Coast was alive, but different. He left Eltara the next morning, quietly under guard, not arrested, but escorted to the capital. He would not face trial. He would be given a position, low-ranking, closely watched, deep in the archives. "Why?" Elise asked when Auric returned. "Because the forgotten are not loyal to anyone," he said, "until someone remembers them." And he did. This act, unexpected, unsettling, spread through the kingdom like a riddle. What kind of ruler spared a traitor? What kind of man turned a murderer into a clerk? The answer was unclear. And that, again, was power. Back in the capital, the towers continued to rise. 5 had been completed. 3 more were under construction. Messengers trained in the new signal language began drills at dawn, their flags flashing from rooftops, their notes logged with precision. Auric visited the first tower alone one evening. The keeper, a young woman named Rena, stood at attention as he entered. "Any reports?" he asked. 2, she said. "A border dispute in the west. A bridge collapse near Elthor." "Good," he nodded. "And from the south?" "Nothing." Auric paused. "Exactly as expected," he said. He climbed to the top of the tower, looking out across the dark fields. Torches dotted the roads like scattered stars. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled. But here in the cold wind, beneath the hard sky, the kingdom was listening, and soon it would speak. Not in shouts, not in panic, but in the quiet certainty of a people who knew their prince had built more than a throne. He had built a spine. And even empires break when the spine refuses to bow. Snowfall returned, this time gentler, as if the land itself was catching its breath. Roads were still navigable, though the forest edges grew heavy with silence. From tower to tower, the kingdom hummed beneath its new order. Signals flashed with precision. Messages moved in hours where once they took days. And though the people of Varnov still wrapped themselves tightly against the cold, it was not just winter they guarded against, it was uncertainty. But inside the citadel, Prince Auric through his vision sharpened. Each success, each subtle tightening of the kingdom's nerves, made him more certain. He was building something beyond a dynasty. He was building memory into the bones of his land. Yet even he could not control the past. One cold morning, as frost laced the edges of the citadel windows, Elise entered his chambers with a scroll sealed in red wax. "It's from Aravel," she said, "the monks at the scriptorium." Auric raised an eyebrow. "They've remained silent since my father's time. They claim to have something you must see." He broke the seal. Inside were only 3 words. The line survived. Below it, a date. One he knew well. The day of the fall at Naram Keep, nearly 30 years ago. The battle where his uncle, Lord Cedrin, was believed to have died defending the western frontier. But more than a battle, it had been a purge. a sweeping, desperate measure by his father to eliminate potential claimants to the throne during a time of fear. And Sidrin had vanished. Oryx stared at the scroll for a long moment, then handed it to Elise. "Prepare my horse. We ride west." Elise's brow furrowed. "Your Grace, it's a monastery." "Not anymore," he said. They rode at dawn, through the hills, past towns still sleeping, past towers that glinted like black teeth against the snow. The journey took 2 days. At last, the ancient stone walls of Aravel appeared on the horizon, half buried in white. The monastery had long been a place of records, not prayer. It housed maps, relics, family lineages, royal decrees, the skeletal history of the realm. Aurek entered alone. The monks bowed but said nothing, as if expecting him. One led him down a narrow staircase to a deep chamber where dust danced in shafts of amber light. At the center of the room stood a figure, tall, robed, face half concealed by shadow. "Your Grace," the man said, "you've come for the truth." "Give it, then," Aurek answered. The figure stepped forward. He was old, white-haired, but his posture was upright, his voice steady. "I am Sedrin. I did not die at Naram. I disappeared by design." Silence fell between them like a stone. "Why?" Aurek asked. "Because your father feared me, and I feared what I might become if I fought him." Aurek said nothing. Sedrin continued. "I was taken in by the monks. In exchange for silence, I gave them everything. Maps, old treaties, forgotten paths of diplomacy. I became a keeper of what had been erased." "And now?" Aurek asked, voice like flint. "Now," Sedrin said softly, "I see the kingdom again. I see what you've built, and I ask one thing." Aurek narrowed his gaze. "Let me serve, not as lord, as memory." It was not a demand, not even a plea. Just a man with his hand open, not reaching, but offering. Aurek studied him. "You know the old alliances, the languages, the bloodlines." "I remember them all," Sedrin replied. "Then you'll return with me." The journey back was quiet. They traveled without banner, only wind and hoofbeats to mark their passing. When they reached the capital, Aurek gave Sedrin a chamber in the west wing, close enough to be called upon, far enough to be forgotten by those who still remembered the purge. That evening, Aurek and Elise stood together in the high observatory. "He could be lying," she said. "He could," Aurek agreed. "But you brought him here." "I did." She turned to him. "Why?" Aurek looked out toward the towers on the horizon where fires flickered like distant stars. "Because kingdoms fall from within when they forget who they are," he said. "And Sedrin remembers." For the next weeks, Sedrin worked without rest. He pored over maps older than the walls of Varnov. He restored ancient treaties, translated scrolls buried beneath dust. He spoke of forgotten customs, tribes on the borderlands who still held oaths to the crown, if only they were reminded. He spoke of blood debts owed by houses long thought extinct. He knew the old names, the ones that mattered. And slowly, Aurek saw a pattern, a lattice of loyalty hidden beneath the years. Not always through power, sometimes through marriage or honor or debt, threads that could be pulled if one had the hands steady enough to do it. One evening, Sedrin presented a document bound in cracked leather. "It's called the Accord of Rivenhall," he said, "signed during the last eclipse nearly 60 years ago, a defensive pact among the hill clans, never broken, never rescinded. Why was it hidden? Because your father declared it obsolete." Aurek turned the pages slowly. The names were still legible. "This," he whispered, "changes everything." It meant that the clans, fierce, proud, often unruly, were, by law and oath, bound to the crown's protection, and in return to its command. Aurek summoned his riders. Messengers were dispatched in every direction, not with orders, but invitations, not with threats, but recognition. "Your names," the letters said, "were never forgotten. Come to Varnov. Let us speak." And they came, not in formation, but in procession. Warlords in leather cloaks, elders with scarred hands, warriors whose blades were older than the towers. They arrived one by one, and Aurek greeted each personally. He did not command, he listened. And in that listening, trust returned. By the week's end, the accord had been renewed. New oaths were spoken, some whispered, some shouted. Gifts were exchanged. The courtyard buzzed with voices not heard in the capital for a generation. Aurek stood above it all, watching, not triumphant, rooted. Elise joined him. You're rebuilding something most people thought gone, she said. No, Auric replied. I'm remembering something they chose to forget. And below in the courtyard of the citadel, as snow began to fall once more, the people of the mountains raised their voices, not in rebellion, but in return. Snow drifted in lazy spirals outside the high windows of the western hall. The courtyard below, once quiet and orderly, now pulsed with a new kind of life. Campfires, war horses, and voices in unfamiliar dialects. The clans had returned. Their standards flew beside the black banners of Varnov. Their leaders sat beneath Auric's roof. And for the first time in decades, the farthest edges of the realm leaned inward, not away. Prince Auric III stood at the center of this transformation, as steady as the stone beneath his feet. But even he felt the weight of it. The old alliances were powerful, but volatile. Unity bought by memory was not the same as unity forged in trust. It would take more than oaths, it would take purpose. That evening, Auric summoned the clan chieftains to the central chamber. The fire crackled low in the hearth, and the walls seemed to lean inward with the gravity of what was to come. They came not as vassals, but as equals. Thorn of the Red Valley, Morella of the Shrouded Pines, Varric of the Winded Steppe. Faces weathered by time and battle, eyes sharp with old distrust. Auric welcomed them with a nod. You have returned, he said, and I am not surprised, because what is coming will not care for borders or distance, or whether we believe the other still matters. It will burn all the same. Thorn leaned forward. We know of the Ottomans, their movement, their hunger. Good, Auric said. Then you know this isn't about a siege. It's about a siege of spirit. Morella folded her arms. You want fighters? I want firekeepers, Auric replied. Each of you will return to your lands with full autonomy, your rule, your law, but you will keep one tower, one signal point aligned with the capital, and you will respond to its call, not in fear, but in unity. Varric scoffed. You ask for quick obedience from people who move slowly. Auric met his gaze. No, I ask for preparation, so when the moment comes, none of us are alone. Silence filled the hall. Then Thorn, the oldest, spoke. My father told me your blood was cold, but perhaps cold is what holds fire steady. He stood, walked to the center, and placed a curved dagger on the table. For the mountain's edge, he said, where snow becomes storm. Morella followed, a silver ring, for the forest that listens before it moves. Then Varric, a strip of cloth dyed deep red, for the wind that strikes when least expected. Auric said nothing. He simply stepped forward and placed one of his own, an old coin worn by time once carried by his mother. For memory, he said, the one thing that cannot be taken by force. When they departed, no treaty was signed, no scrolls exchanged, only understanding. In the days that followed, the towers were finished. One in each province, one voice, multiplied, and the realm began to breathe as one body. But not all were pleased. In the marble corridors of the inner court, whispers spread. Noble houses who had grown rich in the chaos of disunity began to fear. Power, once scattered and private, now leaned toward the throne. Their privileges, inherited and assumed, no longer seemed eternal. Auric expected this, and he was ready. He summoned the Council of Eight, the highest lords of the capital, those whose bloodlines stretched back centuries. They entered the chamber adorned in jewels and veiled superiority. They expected discussion. Instead, they were met with records. Elise entered with a bound volume, thick, worn, meticulously indexed. The Book of Absence, she said. A log of every time your houses failed to respond to a call for arms in the last 50 years. Every shipment withheld, every levy delayed, every lie. She placed it on the table. Lord Vernan stepped forward. You mean to shame us? Auric's voice was calm. No, I mean to close the distance between crown and reality. We served your father, another began. You served yourselves, Auric interrupted. And now you will choose, serve this kingdom as it stands, breathing and awake, or remove yourselves from its heart. You threaten us? I offer clarity. A beat of silence. Then Auric placed a single scroll beside the book. This, he said, is a new charter, rewriting the role of noble estates, redefining their duties, codifying their obligations, not by tradition, but by contribution. No one moved. And those who sign it, Auric continued, will keep their lands, their banners, even their titles. And those who don't, Vernon asked. Auric met his gaze. Will be forgotten. Elise stepped forward again, calm but firm. This document will circulate tomorrow. Each house has 3 days. Not to respond, to act. They filed out, some red with rage, others pale with calculation. Auric said nothing. He had not demanded loyalty. He had invited legacy, and most could not bear the thought of losing it. That night, standing at the tower's edge, Auric watched the lights of the city below. He could see the silhouettes of towers in every direction, tiny flames flickering like watchful eyes. "Do you think they'll sign?" Elise asked. "Some," Auric replied. "The rest will wait, delay, hope the world changes again before they must. And if it doesn't," Auric turned to her, voice steady, "then they'll learn what it means to live in a kingdom with a memory sharper than their ambition." In the following days, signatures arrived, some with wax seals, some with trembling hands. One came without a name, only a blade enclosed, and the phrase, "You were right." Auric placed it beside the coin his mother had given him. Outside, snow continued to fall, but beneath it, something new was taking root. Not fear, not obedience, but structure. A kingdom not ruled by the sharpest sword or the oldest name, but by the quiet insistence of a ruler who believed deeply in continuity, in connection, in the idea that a people truly united could outlast even history itself. And far to the east, just beyond the borders of any map, the Ottoman War Council received word of Varnov's towers, of its clans, of its impossible king, and they began to redraw their own lines. The winds from the eastern plains brought no snow that day, only dust and the dry whisper of movement. In a tent the size of a chapel, lit by oil lamps and stitched with gold thread, the Sultan's war council convened. Maps were unfurled across the table like battle wounds. Every curve of river, every ridge, every town on the Varnovian border had been redrawn. But now, a new mark marred the parchment. Auric's towers. At first, the towers had seemed like arrogance, symbols for a prince who wished to play the king before his time. But the defeat at Sira Valley, the silent realignment of the northern clans, and now the tightening of power in Varnov's heart had forced a reevaluation. The Sultan's vizier, a narrow-eyed man named Harun, traced a line with his finger. "They don't just carry messages," he said. "They respond. This is not defense, it's preparation." Across the table, Commander Gazim, a seasoned general with burn scars on his throat, growled softly, "It is defiance." Harun looked to the Sultan. "What would you have us do, my lord?" The Sultan, cloaked in green and gold, spoke only 4 words. "Break his spine quietly." Far from the war tents, back in the frosted streets of Varnov, the capital moved on in disciplined rhythm. But Auric knew. He knew a storm did not always begin with thunder. Sometimes it started with silence, with missing names, with deaths no one could confirm. So when the first rider failed to arrive, one carrying letters from the high pass of Torch, he did not send another. He sent Lucien. Lucien, whose feet made no sound, on stone, who had lived in shadows before Auric had learned to hold a sword, who did not ask questions, only returned with answers. 3 days passed. Then Lucien returned, cloak dusted with snow, boots streaked with red clay from the ridge paths. "They're inside already," he said. Auric nodded. "How many?" Lucien glanced once at Elise before answering. "Not an army, not yet, but at least 24 operatives, well-trained, disguised as merchants, clergy, even refugees. Most lie dormant, waiting for something." Auric did not speak right away. He crossed to the tall window looking down on the city. A slow snowfall had returned, soft, almost peaceful. "What are they waiting for?" Elise asked. Lucien's voice was colder than the air outside. "For him to slip, one moment, one mistake, then they move." And Auric understood. The enemy would not try to breach Varnov with walls or fire. They would rot it from within, a forgotten face, a knife in a library, a poisoned glass. They would turn his own vigilance against him. So he responded the only way he knew how. He tightened. That very night, every tower received a new codex, a silent alarm embedded in their language, 3 short pulses of flame followed by a pause. If seen, it meant lockdown. Contain, report. Elise organized a web of loyal watchers in the city. Not soldiers, servants, bakers, candle makers. They were trained not to confront, but to observe. Each had only one task: listen and relay. By dawn, Varnov had become a kingdom of ears. But it wasn't enough. Auric summoned Cedrin. His uncle, now a constant presence in the archives, arrived with dust on his fingers and a scroll tucked beneath his arm. "You once said you know every bloodline," Auric began. "I do." "Then tell me, is there any house within Varnov with a claim strong enough that the enemy could try to use it?" Cedrin did not answer immediately. He sat down, unfurled the scroll, and pointed to a single name: House Marine. Extinct in the public eye, but their last daughter was hidden during the purge. She fled north, disguised herself as a healer, married a merchant, had a son. Auric's breath slowed. "Where is he now?" Cedrin didn't flinch. "Here, in the city. A tutor, teaches history to noble children." Lucien had already turned to leave. "Wait," Auric ordered. "Bring him, but gently." By nightfall, the man stood in the great hall. He was small, quiet, thin spectacles on his nose, not a warrior, not even someone who seemed capable of ambition. His name was Talon Marine. "I know why I'm here," he said, voice steady but tired, "and I have no claim to your throne." "That may not matter," Auric replied, "to you, but to those who would see this kingdom fall, your name is a weapon." Talon nodded. "Then strip it from me." Auric studied him. "What do you want?" "To teach," Talon said, "to remain forgotten, to serve not in halls of power but in minds." And that was when Auric decided, "You will be given a new name, a new identity. You'll teach under royal protection, but only on one condition." Talon looked up. "Which is that you never leave this city, and when the time comes, you remember who you are, not for power, but for history." Talon bowed. "I will." Later, Auric stood in the cold alone, in the courtyard beneath the first tower ever built. The brazier atop it glowed steady, its flame catching in the wind like a banner of warning and will. Elise joined him. Was it wise to let him live? "It was necessary," Auric answered, "because one day someone will ask who built this kingdom, and I want that boy, not a soldier, not a priest, not a king, to be the one who tells them." She paused. "You still believe in storytellers?" "I do," Auric said, "because when towers fall, it is the story that stands." That night, from the southern edge of the realm, a tower sent its signal, 3 short flashes, then stillness. The first sign, the enemy had moved, and Varnov answered. The first signal came like a whisper in the night, 3 short flashes from the tower at Calros Pass, followed by silence. No messengers, no follow-up, just the encoded signal. Lockdown, contain, report. It was a flare sent not in panic, but in warning, as if the land itself had opened one wary eye. Prince Auric III stood in the observatory when the news arrived. Snow had blanketed the city again, muting hoofbeats and voices, but the flicker in the east pierced the stillness. He didn't speak. He simply turned to Lucien. "Activate the chain." Lucien nodded and vanished. Within hours, the signal had rippled from tower to tower, each flame answering the last. Throughout the kingdom, innkeepers set aside marked keys. Millers altered their grindstone patterns. Even schoolchildren whispered new rhymes that meant the wall is listening. This was not war. It was a prelude. And Auric knew prelude was where many rulers failed, not because they lacked strength, but because they mistook quiet for peace. He would not make that mistake. By dawn, Elise had compiled the report. She entered his chambers as the first light broke the edge of the snow-covered roofs. Calros Pass Tower is sealed. No injuries, no visible attack, but she hesitated. There was smoke in the woods, and tracks. A group, 6, maybe 7, approached, then retreated. No banners, no sound. "Infiltrators testing the edge," Auric murmured. "Yes, and possibly probing for weaknesses." He walked to the hearth where the flames crackled low. "Send a message to the tower keeper. They are not to pursue, only observe. We must not show hunger." Elise frowned. "They may interpret silence as weakness." Auric turned to her. "Then let them." He understood the deeper war now underway. Not one of blades, but of perception. The enemy wanted reaction, movement, a show of panic. What they would receive instead was discipline. Still, Auric began to prepare. He summoned a meeting not in the central hall, but in the lower chamber, the war cloister, where generals of his grandfather's era once carved strategies into stone. The chamber was quiet now, cold, its benches worn by elbows and years. but he lit its torches one by one and called only those he trusted most. Lucien, Elise, Cedrin, General Velmont of the Eastern Guard, Captain Yasan of the River Watch, and Thorn, the elder chieftain of the Red Valley, now returned as a quiet force of wisdom. Auric stood at the stone table, no parchment this time, no maps, just a circle of eyes. "They are here," he said, "not in force, but in idea, and ideas are the hardest invaders to see." General Velmont leaned forward. "Do you want us to call the reserves?" "No," Auric said. "Not yet. Let them sleep. When we wake them, it will be with clarity." Captain Yisan asked, "Then what is our move?" Auric placed one hand flat on the table. "We do what they least expect. We build." The room fell quiet. "While they sneak and scatter," he continued, "we reinforce the river wall, the grain stores, the mountain crossings. We retrain Signal Corps for rapid evasion. We do not hunt them. We prepare for their failure. Because they will act, and when they do, we will not be waiting behind doors. We will be standing on stone." Cedrin raised an eyebrow. "You mean to go public with this?" Auric nodded. "Yes. Within 3 days, the people will know of the movement at Calros, but not in fear, in precision. They will hear that the towers work, that their prince remains vigilant. That memory once again protects them." Thorn chuckled low. "You're not fighting soldiers, you're fighting ghosts." "And that," Auric said, "is why we must become a mirror." Over the next days, the capital shifted again, not with sirens or soldiers in the streets, but with the subtle tightening of every routine. Tower runners were rotated. Markets posted notices about ration training. Healers were instructed to begin carrying signal tokens among their herbs. Across the kingdom, nothing stopped, but everything became aware. Auric spent those days in near silence. He rose before dawn and walked the walls of the inner citadel. He stopped at each tower, not to inspect, but to listen. The creak of ropes, the rustle of scrolls, the breathing of watchmen trying not to shiver. All these things he counted. They were his heartbeat now. Then on the 4th night it came, not in the city, but in Trellin, a trading village near the forested south. It began with fire. A grain warehouse burned just before midnight. No screams, no demands, just a sudden burst of flame and 2 masked figures fleeing into the tree line. The villagers rallied quickly, thanks to the new drills. No lives were lost, but the message was clear. We are inside your circle. The report reached Auric within the hour. Elise brought it, her face drawn. "They're not testing anymore," she said. "They're provoking." Auric closed his eyes. "Then we are no longer in the prelude," he said. "We are in the overture." He turned to Lucien. "Send no soldiers." Lucien blinked. "None? Only builders," Auric said. "Rebuild the granary stronger, twice its size. Let the villagers help. Let them see that what burns returns." Elise said, "The people may demand blood." "They'll demand justice," Auric corrected, "and we will give it to them, but not through anger, through completion." The next morning, Varnov's public forum opened with a decree, not of punishment, but of progress. Every village was to receive double grain storage, new fire patrols, and a rotating presence of tower apprentices to train in signal methods. The enemy had hoped to inspire panic. Instead, they inspired precision. In Trellin, the rebuilt granary rose in 5 days. At its dedication, the villagers stood in silence as a message from Auric was read aloud. They thought the fire would silence you. Instead, it lit your name upon the stones of this kingdom. Let them burn what they wish. What matters is what remains. The people did not cheer. They nodded, because it was not rhetoric they wanted. It was continuity. Back in the palace, Auric returned to the war cloister. One more candle was lit on the wall. He stood before it. "This is not yet war," he said softly, "but it is the story before war." And that, he knew, was where kingdoms lived or died, in the pages most rulers never noticed. A cold wind swept through the vaulted corridors of the citadel, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine smoke and something fainter, anticipation. Not panic, not chaos, just a quiet readiness that had begun to settle over the capital like snow on a well-tended roof. Varnov was awake now, not in alarm, but in awareness. Prince Auric III stood in the upper study, watching scribes below prepare a new dispatch. They moved quickly, fluidly, guided by habits now ingrained from months of drills. Elise stood beside him, cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "They've begun to react before the signal reaches them," she said, nodding toward a scroll. "Tower 6 lit its code before we sent confirmation. They saw smoke on the horizon, no flames, no attack, and still acted, without orders." Auric did not smile, but a glint of satisfaction lit his eyes. "Good. That means the kingdom is no longer waiting for permission. It's thinking." He turned from the window. "Send acknowledgement and double the courier pay for that tower. Let every watchman know it matters." Elise nodded, then paused. "There's one more message from the southern plains, from Alden's Rest." Auric raised an eyebrow. "The Orchard Province?" "Yes. A rider was found, dead. No wound, no sign of struggle, just gone, collapsed by the roadside." "Poison? Possibly. No marks. No message pouch either." Auric looked past her, out toward the snow-covered valley. "They're not burning now. They're listening. And they're silencing." He turned to Lucien, who stood in the shadows beyond the map table. "Send the Quiet Four." Lucien didn't ask. He just vanished. The Quiet Four were not soldiers nor spies in the traditional sense. They were observers, archivists of threat. Men and women trained to notice what others overlooked: pauses in speech, sudden absences, altered patterns in footsteps. When they entered a town, they did not ask questions. They became questions. While they moved south, Auric focused inward. The outer attacks, fires, deaths, signals were not designed to cripple. They were distractions, noise to mask a deeper aim. Somewhere something was slipping beneath the surface, a thread being pulled. He returned to the library. There, Cedrin waited, scrolls stacked around him like the roots of a massive tree. "I've found something," the old man said, voice low. He handed Auric a sealed packet. Not old, new. Delivered quietly, buried in diplomatic cargo. "It's from the Dalmari coast, a minor port town. But there's a name in here that should not appear." Auric opened it. One line stood out. "Trade approved under the seal of House Pharaoh." He froze. "Pharaoh is gone," he said. "Disbanded under my father, their lands seized, their archives burned." Cedrin nodded grimly. "Or so we thought, but someone is reviving their name, their seal, their connections. And their loyalty? Still unknown. But House Pharaoh was never aligned with the crown. They believed in sovereign kinship, a doctrine that defied central rule. If they are rising again, they won't attack from without," Auric said quietly. "They'll divide from within." The room was silent for a long time. Then Auric spoke with clarity. "I want every shipment entering from the coast inspected, quietly, and every merchant house checked for recent seal authorizations. If Pharaoh is back, they are not just smuggling goods, they're smuggling narratives." He stepped away from the desk, pacing. "People don't need armies to fall, they need doubt." Pharaoh knew this. Outside, a soft knock. A squire entered. "My lord, the woman you summoned is here. The storyteller." Auric nodded. "Bring her." She entered quietly, older than expected, with a spine like a birch tree and eyes the color of dusk. Her name was Kira, and she had been a wanderer for decades, reciting tales and riddles in roadside inns. "You've walked every road in the realm," Auric said, not as a question. "I have," she replied, "and listened more than I've spoken. That's what I need now. Not a tale, a temperature. What do the people say when the guards leave the room? What's whispered by firelight?" Kira folded her hands. "They speak of shadows," she said. "Not the kind that frighten, but the kind that watch. They say you see everything now, that even silence has ears." Auric frowned. "Is that fear or comfort?" "Neither," she said. "It's reverence, but that doesn't last. People do not want to be watched, they want to be understood." Auric absorbed that like a wound. He dismissed her with thanks and turned to Elise. "We've built a wall," he said. "Now we must build a voice, one they can trust." He ordered the creation of the Circle of Candles, a citizen forum, carefully selected, quietly managed. Farmers, scholars, weavers, even former soldiers, each one chosen not for influence but for integrity. They would meet monthly, report directly to Elise, anonymous but empowered. "They will speak of what we miss," Auric said, "and warn us when reverence becomes resentment." Within days, the circle met for the first time, and their first message was clear. The towers are admired, but admiration breeds distance. They must not only signal, but listen. Auric responded immediately. Each tower was given a new mandate. Once a week, the keeper would descend into the nearest village and gather a single story of hardship, of triumph, of need. These would be logged, copied, and sent to the capital. Not military reports, not surveillance, stories. And slowly, a strange thing happened. The kingdom began to speak, not just in signals or alarms, but in voices. Real voices. A farmer's rhyme about frost seasons in Nereth, a midwife's lament about losing lantern oil, a blind potter's description of glaze by touch. These arrived in the capital like heartbeat rhythms, and Auric read each one. Some nights he read aloud by candlelight, even as threats darkened his door. Because he understood now, towers may guard a kingdom, but stories make it worth guarding. And if the enemy wished to break them, if they hoped to unravel Varnov's spine, they would have to fight not just walls or armies or signals. They would have to fight memory. And memory now had found its voice. The wind shifted again, coming from the west this time, warmer but not kind. It carried with it no scent of smoke, no echo of hoofbeats, only the weight of something imminent. In Varnov, the bells did not toll, yet every tower stood brighter, every steward stood taller, and every citizen, whether in palace corridor or orchard grove, had begun to move with that same quiet purpose. Auric III, now no longer merely prince but something greater in presence, stood at the citadel's western wall. From here he could see the low hills rolling into the horizon where the old road to Raveth snaked through thinning woods and broken stone. A message had arrived that morning, delivered not by courier but folded inside a loaf of bread handed to a baker in a border town. It was written in charcoal on thin birch bark. They've crossed. 20, maybe more. Uniforms removed, eyes cold. One of them wore a pharaoh ring. The baker never spoke a word. The message was passed hand to hand, town to village, tower to gate, until it reached Elise just before sunrise. Now the palace prepared not for war, but for confirmation. Elise met Auric atop the tower stairs. "They know we've seen them," she said, "which means their next step is not retreat." "No," Auric replied, "it's provocation." He moved inside, descending into the chamber below, the observatory hall, where the maps were drawn not on parchment, but on stone. Roads, rivers, supply lines, etched permanently to remind every generation of what endures when ink fades. Around the stone table stood Cedrin, Lucien, Captain Yisan, and a new figure, Alaric of the Marshlands, recently appointed commander of the Tower Guard, a man whose silence spoke louder than most commands. Auric gestured to the map. "They'll strike soon," he said, "but not where we're strongest." Cedrin leaned in. "The question is, what's their goal? It's not conquest. They don't bring armies." "No," Auric said. "They bring doubt." Lucien nodded grimly. "Fear changes borders faster than swords." Alaric spoke for the first time. "Then we remove the fuel before they light the flame." He placed a small object on the table, a miniature replica of a tower. Then beside it, a ring, the pharaoh ring. Cold, black stone, etched with an Ouroboros coiling around a broken crown. "This symbol is appearing again," he said. "On walls, on coins, even in carvings in the Undercity. It's not just a mark, it's a story, a myth. They're trying to awaken something in the people, a memory of division." Auric stared at the ring. "Then we give them a different memory." That afternoon, a new proclamation was issued, not by military decree, but by public invitation. "Come, bring your oldest stories. Tell us of before, the kingdoms before the crown, the lands before the unification. Let your voice join the history that cannot be erased." It was called the Memory Gathering, held at the outer courtyard. No guards, no nobles, just a fire pit and chairs and an open circle. They came by the hundreds, old women with faded banners from villages long gone, blacksmiths who remembered border skirmishes, children who recited rhymes that no book had ever recorded. And Auric sat among them, not above, not behind a veil, but within the circle. He listened to a weaver from Norhollow who recalled her grandfather's tale of the Lost March, to a stonemason who sang the war song of the Reaches, a chant passed down only through humming, to a scarred veteran who spoke of the day the towers first lit together and the silence that followed, not because the kingdom was quiet, but because it was united. These stories were transcribed by candlelight in real time. And then, without announcement, Oryx stood and told his own. Not of battle, but of his mother, of how she taught him not to fear silence, but to fill it wisely. She said, he told them, that power is not held in the hand, it is held in the pause before the hand moves. The crowd did not cheer. They simply nodded, because it wasn't a performance, it was inheritance. That night, as the embers of the memory gathering dimmed, Elise entered Oryx's study. "It's spreading," she said. "We've received word from 5 other regions. They're holding their own circles, uninvited, unordered." Oryx looked up from the scroll he was reading. "Perfect," he said, but she hesitated. He waited. There's a pattern emerging in the undercurrent. In whispers, they speak of a second tower. Oryx raised an eyebrow. Meaning? A structure, hidden, older than ours. They say it doesn't send signals, it absorbs them. Cedrin was summoned immediately. When told of the second tower, he paled. "It was a legend," he said, "from the time of the Broken Kings, said to be built during the Age of Division. A tower made not to warn, but to listen, hidden deep in the central mountains, abandoned." "Could it be real?" Oryx asked. "I never found proof," Cedrin replied, but the Pharaoh line believed in it. They thought it was a key to returning the realm to fragments, one flame to silence the rest. Lucian stepped forward. "If it exists, they'll try to reach it." Oryx nodded. "Then we must find it first." 3 teams were dispatched, small, fast, equipped not for war, but for witnessing. Their task, locate any trace of this second tower. Find the structure before the enemy found its story. But Oryx didn't wait idly. He gathered builders, masons, architects, and he ordered the construction of a new signal fire, not in the city, but in the northern highlands, where no one expected one. When asked why, he said only, "If they seek to silence us, then we must keep lighting new voices. They can chase the echoes. We will be making more." And so Varnov grew louder, not in volume, but in presence. Every new tower lit was a declaration. We are here, we are watching, but more than that, we are connected. By the week's end, 3 things had happened. First, one of the search teams sent a coded flare from the base of the Windspire Mountains. Second, a pharaoh mark was found etched into the inner wall of a tower in the south, hidden behind a support beam. Third, a farmer in the far west sent a message with only 3 words. The silence cracked. Oryx stood at the map once more, eyes sharp. He whispered, not to his council, not to Elise, not even to the gods, but to the kingdom itself. "Then speak, Varnov, speak before they silence you." And across stone, snow, and shadow, the kingdom began to answer. The Windspire Mountains loomed like jagged memories, black against the pale sweep of snow and sky. Somewhere within their folds, where maps ended and rumors began, lay the truth behind the second tower. And now, for the first time in centuries, someone had dared to search for it, not as myth, but as threat. The signal had come at twilight, 3 flares from the Windspire base, followed by a long pause. It was the confirmation Oryx had both hoped for and dreaded. He called no council. Instead, he summoned only Elise, Lucian, and Cedrin into the war cloister. "The team has found something," Oryx said. "Not ruins, not carvings, a structure, still standing, still silent, buried, perhaps, sealed, but intact." Cedrin's hands trembled slightly as he unrolled the oldest scroll in the library's possession, an inheritance from a time when history lived only in whispers. He pointed to a vague etching. The Tower of Silence, also called the Listening Throne. It was said to predate the founding of the unified realm, a beacon for separatists. It didn't broadcast light, it recorded light, absorbed signal, and once every decade it would send one answer. Oryx frowned. An answer to whom? "No one knows. Or everyone," Cedrin whispered. "It was destroyed or believed to be." Lucian tapped the edge of the table. "If the Pharaoh loyalists are reviving the doctrine of sovereign kinship, this tower is their altar, a living symbol." Elise added, "And if they awaken it, they could fracture the very meaning of your towers, make every signal suspect, every fire a lie." Oryx looked toward the east-facing window, where the snowy plains glowed beneath a moon that seemed too still. "We leave at first light." Elise's eyes narrowed. "You're going there yourself?" "Yes," Oryx said. "This cannot be entrusted. If that tower stands, if it still listens, then it must see the face of this kingdom. Not a sword, not a rider, Me. Lucien did not object. He only began preparing provisions. By sunrise, a small company departed the capital under false banners, masquerading as a surveying team from the Department of Infrastructure. Their path wound through frost-bitten ridges and forgotten goat trails, guided only by the map etched hastily by the returning scouts. They rode in silence for 3 days. Each night the fires were dimmed. Each morning they woke to frost stiffening their cloaks and breath curling like smoke from unwritten pages. On the 4th morning they reached the outer edge of what the scouts had called the Hollow. It was not a valley, not truly. It was a depression in the rock, a kind of breathing space in the spine of the mountain, as if something large had once rested there and never returned. And at its center, buried halfway in earth and snow, stood the tower. It was not tall, not proud. It had no brazier, no banners, no windows. It resembled an inverted bell, wide at its base, narrowing as it climbed, made of stone so black it absorbed the morning light and gave nothing back. No one spoke for several minutes. Even Auric felt it, a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with cold. Elise finally broke the silence. It's listening, even now. Lucien stepped forward, approaching the tower's edge. He placed one hand on its surface and immediately pulled it back. Warm. Cedrin's breath caught. By the ancestors, they encircled it carefully. No doors, no seams, just smooth stone and old moss. Then Lucien found something, a single mark barely visible. The Ouroboros, the mark of Pharaoh. Auric studied it in silence. They've been here. Or they never left, Elise murmured. He turned to Cedrin. Can it be opened? Cedrin hesitated. There were stories that the tower responds to memory, to truth, that it only opens to someone who speaks not a command but a confession. Auric stepped forward, placing both hands on the cold stone, and he spoke, not in command, but in truth. I am Auric Thorn III, son of a silent king, born under a divided banner, raised in the shadow of failure. I have feared legacy, feared that I would rule with echoes instead of vision, but I have built, not alone, and not as ruler, but as keeper, not of power, but of connection. The wind stopped, the snow paused midair. A deep hum rolled beneath their feet. Then, with the sound of old stone breathing for the first time, a narrow seam appeared in the tower wall. It opened, just wide enough for one man. Auric turned to the others. I go alone. Lucien began to object, but Auric raised a hand. If this tower is a mirror of power, then it must face the weight of a single will. I will go. I must. He stepped inside. The light vanished. Only his heartbeat remained. The interior was not dark. It was empty, featureless, and yet somehow alive. In the center stood a stone pedestal. Atop it, an orb, glass-like but swirling faintly with something more than mist. It pulsed once when Auric approached, as if recognizing presence. He spoke again. This kingdom will not be ruled by shadows, not by myth, not by the memory of rebellion. It will be ruled by its own people. And if this tower exists to absorb voices, then let it absorb mine. He reached out and touched it. The orb flared, images exploded in his mind, not visions, memories, not his. Towers lit during the Reach's war, children watching their village burn, hands building the first signal pyres, a woman giving birth as a signal blazed above her town, a boy learning to read from a tower scribe. Every signal ever sent, every moment of connection. And then, a voice. Not old, not young, timeless. Then you are not a king, you are a thread. Auric whispered yes. The light faded. And when he opened his eyes, the orb was dark. The pedestal had receded, the door reopened. He stepped out into daylight. The others rushed forward, but paused when they saw his face. He looked both older and clearer. It's not a weapon, he said. It's a record. And now it knows us. Elise asked, what happens now? Auric looked to the horizon. They will come for it. Lucien's hand moved to his blade. Then we defend it? Auric shook his head. No, we build a new tower above it, not to hide it, to honor it. A tower of stories, a tower of memory. So when they come, they see not stone. He turned, voice firm as iron, but the weight of everything we refuse to forget. Word spread, not through proclamations, not through trumpet fanfare, but in the way quiet truth always does. From breath to breath, from fire circle to shepherd's path, carried by those who had been watching, waiting, and now believing. The second tower was real, and it had opened, not to destroy, but to remember. Back in Varnov, the capital stirred as if waking from a deeper sleep. It wasn't fear that spread now. It was purpose. At Oric's command, construction began not in secret, but in the open. Stones were hauled up the Windspire slopes by ox and hand. Beams were cut from the eastern groves. Artisans were summoned from across the kingdom, not just masons and carpenters, but storytellers, weavers, carvers, and poets. "This will not be a watchtower," Oric declared. "It will be a memory light, a place where every signal echoes through the truth of our people." They named it the Hall of the Unbroken Flame. The foundation was laid around the old structure, carefully, never touching the core, never disturbing the ancient pedestal. Instead, they built up, around, and above, transforming the site into something new, half altar, half beacon. At the very top, instead of a brazier, a great dome of polished obsidian was fitted, a mirror, not to shine outward, but to reflect inward. Every surface within was carved with stories. Each region of the realm was invited to send one tale, of pain, of joy, of survival. And each day, Oric himself would sit for an hour and read aloud one submission to the gathered workers, scribes, and travelers who came to witness the tower's rise. Meanwhile, Elise remained in Varnov, overseeing what had now become a fragile balance. For while the tower rose, the threat did not fade. If anything, it evolved. Reports began to arrive of whispers spreading in the borderlands. Not of revolt, not of armies, but of division made divine. Priests in black robes, faces veiled, preaching that unity was a cage and that true freedom lay in disconnection. They carried no swords, they carried rings, the mark of Pharaoh. Cedrin identified them immediately. Memory bleeders, he called them. An old tactic. They don't erase stories, they distort them. They take the truth, twist the ending, and feed it back to the people in fragments. Arek returned to the capital that night and called an emergency gathering of the Circle of Candles. Each member reported something different: strange hymns sung near old wells, painted messages in forgotten dialects, bonfires lit at abandoned crossroads. But all of them ended with the same line: "No flame lasts forever." Auric stood silently, listening. Then he said, "They misunderstand us." He walked to the window of the Hall of Records and looked out at the towers in the distance. "We were never trying to make the flame last forever. We're trying to make sure it always returns." He turned back to the circle. "They think memory is fragile, but memory shared becomes a wall they cannot pass." That evening he composed a letter, one he did not send through official channels, but gave to a young courier, a girl named Mira who had once been a tower scribe. He said only, "Deliver this to the coastal town of Red Harbor. Speak only to Elon Tyr." No one else knew what the letter said, only that Mira returned 3 days later with a single sentence: "The wind is shifting, the tide is with you." The next morning, banners were raised not only in Varnov but in every major city. New banners, silver on charcoal, shaped like an open eye encircled by flame. Not a sigil of dominance, a sigil of witness. And with those banners came a new decree. Every citizen may submit one story, anonymous or named, to the Flame Hall archives. Stories of hope, of hardship, of healing. Every tale would be read, logged, and made part of the living foundation of the realm. The people responded, not in trickles, in floods. Caravans arrived daily, carrying scrolls, carvings, even embroidered cloths stitched with verses. Children told stories, carved on bark. Elders carried memory stones, wrapped in linen. One particularly moving entry came from a man with no name, who had walked barefoot from the northern wastes just to deliver a single phrase: "My brother lit a tower once. He died thinking it didn't matter. I came to tell you it did." Auric had those words etched into the obsidian rim of the Flame Hall's dome. Meanwhile, the enemy moved, not openly but with quiet force. Small villages near the border began vanishing from maps, not razed, not conquered, simply emptied. No cries, no resistance, just silence, as if their memories had been plucked like threads from a tapestry. Lucian brought reports of entire districts speaking in rhymes that weren't their own, of marketplaces where all the coins bore the pharaoh ring. "This is not warfare," he said. "It's narrative sabotage." Arek nodded. "Then we answer in kind." He ordered the founding of the Living Chorus, a group of traveling speakers, musicians, and record keepers who would carry the real stories back into contested lands. Their only weapon, truth made beautiful. They wore no armor. They wore the banner of the open eye, and wherever they went, people began to remember again. It wasn't a swift battle, but it was a growing one. By midsummer, the Hall of the Unbroken Flame stood complete. Its walls were engraved not with victories, but with voices. Every surface hummed with stories. You couldn't enter the hall without hearing, softly, always changing, the echoes of the people. Auric climbed to the dome alone one night. Outside, the stars were beginning to shift. The wind carried with it not threat, but song. One of the Living Chorus was performing in the lower gardens, and the melody floated up like a promise. He stood in the center of the dome beneath the obsidian sky, closed his eyes, and said aloud, "We do not rule by fear. We do not stand by force. We endure by remembrance." And then he whispered, "Let them come." Because he knew now, truly knew, that the kingdom's greatest defense wasn't walls or weapons. It was the refusal to forget. Autumn came earlier than expected. The leaves that blanketed the high passes of Varnov turned gold, then flame red, then brittle brown, like parchment bearing names long spoken. The skies above the flame hall were clearer than they had been in months, and the air carried a kind of clarity, not coldness, but awareness, the kind that came just before something significant. From the highest tier of the hall, Auric stood in silence. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood a child, no more than 12, named Kilon. One of the orphan readers, a group formed quietly over the past season. Children who had no homes, no names, no records, but were given books, memory, place. They took turns tending the hall at night, lighting lamps, checking the names etched along the archive corridors. Kellan spoke first, his voice soft but steady. "Do you think the tower still listens, my lord?" Auric looked down at the boy, then at the obsidian dome overhead. "Yes, but more than that, Kellan. I believe it remembers now." The boy nodded solemnly and returned to his reading bench. Auric remained, gazing at the darkness beyond the flames, where the silhouette of distant movement began to take form. Too far to identify, but not too far to feel. The Pharaoh loyalists had begun to move openly. It started with a ship arriving at a western port, cloaked in fog, bearing a flag no longer used for generations, a broken crown over an empty scroll. From that ship came emissaries, not with swords, but with gifts. They set up tents in villages along the coast, offered medicines, tools, rare spices, and then they offered stories, but not just tales, carefully rewritten histories. A merchant woman approached a town council and told them her grandfather had served the kingdom, but had been silenced for asking the wrong questions. A former monk showed painted scrolls depicting a younger Varnov, fractured but freer. A bard wandered the markets playing a ballad titled "The Flame Consumes Itself." Each of these small acts might have passed as strange or even desperate if they hadn't been synchronized. Auric convened his closest once more. Elise, Lucian, Cedrin, and now Alaric. "They're not fighting us," Lucian said. "They're replacing us." "Replacing our past," Cedrin added. "And if they succeed, they won't need to conquer our future." Elise unrolled a series of intercepted pamphlets, cleverly worded, elegantly printed, spread across taverns and temples alike. The slogans chilled the room. "No kingdom remembers everything. Truth changes, so should loyalty. When the flame fades, you will still be you." Auric stared at them for a long moment. "They're right," he said finally. We don't remember everything, but what we do remember, we choose." He turned to Cedrin. "How many regional towers still report in daily?" 89%, Cedrin answered. "Some are slowing. 1 or 2 have gone quiet. Most still burn strong." "Then we send them more than reports," Auric said. "We send them voices." And thus the Echo Lantern Project was born. Each regional tower would receive a carved voice lantern, a crystal globe infused with a single recorded memory, spoken by a citizen from the capital. It might be a farmer's harvest tale, a child's poem, a blacksmith's forge song. The lanterns glowed softly and replayed their story when touched. They arrived quietly, always at night, left beside the tower braziers. It was a reminder, you are not alone in the flame. Soon, stories from the provinces began returning. A woman in Drellsmere lit her signal not for danger, but to recite her grandmother's lullaby to the stars. A baker in the Stone Vale carved the first known recipe poem into the side of his town's tower. A tower guard in the High Reach sent a signal composed entirely of beats, 3 long, 2 short. "I'm still here," and Varnov recorded it all. Meanwhile, the Pharaoh forces continued their strategy, now focusing on scholars. Several renowned historians vanished, only to return later with slightly altered research. The famed archivist of Rivermaw publicly declared that some memories have outlived their usefulness. One morning, a famous painter was found reworking an old royal portrait, replacing Aurek's face with a featureless mask. Elise watched these shifts with growing unease. "They aren't just changing what people know," she said. "They're changing what people trust." Aurek listened, and one evening beneath the great dome, he made a decision. "We hold a convocation," he said, "a gathering of all tower keepers, circle speakers, the living chorus, and the orphan readers, all together, in the hall." Lucian's eyes widened. "That's nearly 1,000 people, in one place. A single fire would—" "Then we guard it," Aurek said. "But we must show the kingdom and them that we don't fear gathering. We don't fear sharing. We exist together." Preparations began at once. Every region sent one representative. Elders and children arrived together, some in wagons, some on foot. The Hall of the Unbroken Flame was transformed into a layered ring of voices. Platforms built into the stone walls allowed all to see, all to speak. The convocation lasted 3 nights. No laws were passed, no treaties signed, just voices. One by one, the people stood. A boy spoke of his tower's first fire and how it saved his village. An old woman sang her husband's last signal before he vanished in the northern snows. A tower keeper from the marshlands cried as she read a message written by her sister, missing for 20 years. On the final night, Aurek spoke. He didn't stand above them, he stood among them. He said, "There is no perfect flame, only the one we tend, together. Memory is not a weapon, it is a garden. It must be weeded, watered, and shared. And if the Pharaoh wish to offer their version of the past, then let us offer ours, not by force, but by presence." The hall was silent. Then the orphan readers, every last one, lit a candle, 1,000 small lights, flickering in harmony against the dark. It was not spectacle, it was testament. And outside, beyond the windspire, beyond the borders of Varnov, a storm gathered. But the towers still burned, and for now, that was enough. Rain returned to the capital not as a storm, but as a whisper. Thin, cold lines drawn against windows and cloaks alike. The streets of Varnov darkened, not with fear, with quiet, as though the city itself had taken a breath and was waiting for what came next. In the uppermost chamber of the Hall of the Unbroken Flame, Aurek sat alone, not reading, not writing, just listening. Below, the great archive glowed faintly, voices drifting upward like incense, stories from the marshlands, poems from mountain passes, letters addressed to the unknown. The kingdom was speaking, but outside those walls, something else was moving. Elise entered without knocking. She moved silently, standing by the rain-laced window. "They're gathering at Greywater," she said. Aurek didn't respond immediately. "How many?" "Too many to call it anything but an army." Lucian joined them moments later. He was soaked, his boots still dripping. "They've taken the eastern forks. Not with soldiers, with symbols, painted walls, disfigured statues. They even replaced a village's welcome sign with a plaque that says, 'Truth ends here.'" Aurek turned away from the window. "And how did the villagers respond?" Lucian hesitated. "They sang. Sang. A lullaby, old from the time of the early towers. No instruments, just their voices rising as the pharaoh procession passed through." Elise smiled faintly. "Even when we say nothing, we speak." Aurek nodded, but his gaze hardened. "They will not stop. They mean to unmake the flame, not through fire, but fog." The Council of Nine convened that night in the Stormkeep Hall. The outer flames were dimmed, the inner lights soft. No armor was worn, no weapons displayed. Aurek stood at the center, a simple cloak over his tunic, the sigil of the open eye stitched just below the collarbone. "We have faced enemies who came with blades," he said. "This one comes with erasures, and to fight that, we do not sharpen steel. We sharpen memory." He turned to the Keeper of Echoes, a stooped man named Barros, who rarely spoke in public. Barros bowed, then stepped forward. We propose the forging of the Echelon Codex, a single, living volume, not of law, not of rule, but of voice. Every tower, every region, every known settlement will send one story, not the oldest, not the most noble, but the truest. Auric considered the risk. A single object, a single location. If taken, burned, or twisted, it could become a weapon against them. But Barros continued, it will not be ink, it will be braid. Threads of dyed fabric inscribed with runes woven into a tapestry. No pages, no covers, just a single roll that must be touched to be read. If someone rewrites it, the weave breaks. Lucien muttered, a history that bleeds when wounded. Barros nodded solemnly. Auric approved it that night. And so began the most ambitious task the realm had attempted since unification. Not to build, but to remember, together. Every town received the call. Some sent chants, others sent confessions. A prisoner in the northernmost mine sent a blood-stained scarf with a line sewn into its edge. I saw the tower burn and still believed in light. By winter's start, the braid stretched longer than the grand table of records. It was carried on the back of a white-robed walker named Melrin, who had taken a vow of silence. He visited each region, let their chosen one hold the braid, and then added their voice. When he reached Varnov, the braid glowed faintly in the dusk. It pulsed, not with magic, but with weight. Not everyone was pleased. The Pharaoh movement responded swiftly. They built their own monument, a tower of polished iron placed directly across from a raised signal post. It had no fire, no windows, just a single inscription. There is no memory, only repetition. At night, their acolytes recited distorted versions of known histories, tales where the towers had failed, where Auric's ancestors had silenced truth, where unity was built on blood and fear. They broadcast these stories through low-voice speakers embedded into their temples. Children began to recite them in border schools. Some towers went dark, not attacked, but forgotten. Auric's court was shaken. Elise brought him a report one morning. 5 towns near the gray border had requested to remove their tower lighters, replacing them with local narrators trained by the Pharaoh network. They don't believe in fire anymore, she said. They believe in silence that sounds like truth. Auric didn't flinch. Then we must make truth loud again. He returned to the Flame Hall and did something he had never done before. He asked for the memory stone of his father. It was a tradition among tower-blooded lines. Each ruler recorded their final message, sealed in a glass orb and stored in the Whispering Archive, only to be played once after death. Auric requested it be unsealed. When the orb was placed before him, the room stilled. Everyone, the scribes, the readers, even Keelan, paused. The orb flickered. Then the voice of King Auric II filled the hall. If you hear this, my son, then I am gone. And if I am gone, know that I died with one regret, that I did not speak sooner. I believed silence was strength, that a king must endure, not explain. But I watched the towers go dark, not from attack, but from neglect. We must speak, my son, not just command. Speak. The message ended. The hall was silent. Auric stood and said simply, then let us speak. From that day, a new tradition began. Every tower now held weekly gatherings, open to all, called light circles. No agenda, no officials, just voices. Some cried, some sang, some just sat. But the towers began to hum again, not from fire, but from presence. The Pharaoh movement watched. They reacted. They set the Iron Tower aflame, not in destruction, but in display. The metal glowed, forming a single burning phrase, noise is not truth. Auric responded by walking to the Flame Hall's outer court, raising no banner, no guard, and simply reciting a poem he learned as a child. Even silence has a name. It lives between the tower's breaths, not in absence, in return. And all across the kingdom, light returned. The snow came early that year. It blanketed Varnov's rooftops with soft defiance, covering even the banners atop the Flame Hall. The braziers continued to burn through the frost, but the streets quieted as the citizens waited. Not in fear, at least not entirely. It was a different kind of stillness now, the stillness of a realm holding its breath. Because across the horizon, from the cliffs of the eastern border to the cliffs of the western sea, the Pharaoh movement had begun its final phase. They called it the reframing. Not a battle, not a siege, a rewriting. It began with signal towers being replaced, not with force, but with mirrors. Tall, polished monoliths reflecting nothing but sky. They were erected overnight, always at the edge of light, in places where towers had once guided the lost. Villagers would awaken to find their signal tower taken down, not burned, just removed. In its place stood the Pharaoh mirror. No announcements, no demands, just reflection. And underneath, inscribed in dozens of languages, truth is what remains when nothing is said. Some communities embraced them. They had grown tired, isolated, forgotten, and the mirrors offered a strange comfort. No orders, no messages, no expectations, just quiet. Elise brought the news to Aurek. There are now 37 mirrors across the realm, 3 of them within a day's ride of Varnov. Aurek studied the map. His finger hovered over the coastal village of Bryn Hollow, a place that had once been the first to light its tower during the Reach's crisis. And the tower? Gone, Lucian said grimly. The villagers say it was taken apart piece by piece. No fire, no sound, just absence. The council met at dusk that day. The storm outside howled against the stained glass of the tower archive, casting fractured colors across the war table. This is not conquest, Barrows said. It's subtraction. They are erasing the kingdom line by line until only their silence remains. Aurek nodded. Then we do not answer with noise. He rose. We answer with meaning. That night, he made a proclamation unlike any before. Every tower, every hall, every town square, every circle of candles would light its flame at the same moment, not to send warnings, but to speak a single truth. Not in defense, in declaration. The message would be shared in every dialect, every tone. We are not perfect. We are not eternal, but we are present, and presence is truth. What we remember, we become. They called it the illumination. The illumination. It took 7 days to prepare. Each region was given its own version of the phrase, personalized, spoken in the voice of a local elder or a child or a tower keeper. The living chorus returned from the road to help spread the song. The echo lanterns pulsed again, this time with synchronized light rhythms, like heartbeat across the hills. And when the night of the illumination came, the kingdom held its breath. Then, one by one, from the glacier posts of the north to the river fords of the south, from the mining towers half buried in snow to the wide-roofed flame hall itself, the lights bloomed, not with fire alone, with voice, 1,000 different accents, cadences, tongues speaking one truth. We are here. People wept, even those who had begun to forget. In the village of Bryn Hollow, where the mirror had stood for 3 weeks, a child's voice broke the silence. He had memorized the Flame Hall's phrase from a paper left behind by a visiting bard. He climbed the mirror, stood atop it, and sang. The words weren't loud. They were cracked, halting, but they were true. Others joined, and the mirror, once gleaming, began to darken under snowfall and breath. By dawn, it had been removed by the villagers themselves. The Pharaoh movement did not retreat, but it began to split. Some among them began to question the meaning of their own silence. Was it clarity or cowardice? Aurek received a letter 2 days later, left anonymously on the Flame Hall steps. The handwriting was careful. I was once one of them. I believed that quiet was the only answer to noise. But I was wrong. You didn't shout us down. You listened us back. That is the power they fear most. Not fire, but hearing. I will help. They never found the sender. But they didn't need to, because the silence was no longer growing, it was shifting. That winter, Varnov saw the first snowfall, where every tower in the realm remained lit for 1 full week. Even in the farthest outposts, even in places where no word had returned in years. Children were born during that week and named after towers. A ship once thought lost in the western fog sent a flare to the Flame Hall, declaring its safe return. And on the 8th day, the snow stopped, and for the first time in recent memory, the clouds parted over the hall of the unbroken flame. Sunlight struck the obsidian dome. It reflected not outward, but inward, lighting the stories carved into its walls, etching fire into memory. Aurek stood at its base, wrapped in a simple coat beside Elise and Lucien and Cedrin and Kellen. He did not speak first. Kellen did. He looked up at the dome, then at the king, and asked, "Does this mean the story is over?" Auric smiled. No, he said, it means the story is ours again. Spring returned to Varnov as a whisper, not a flourish. Where once the signal towers had lit only against fear, they now glowed each evening with stories, laughter, and song. The torches didn't blaze, they shimmered as though remembering, not warning. But beneath that calm, the weight of what had been built pressed inward. The kingdom had endured, but it had not yet healed. And Auric knew. Endurance without renewal was simply waiting. One morning, he stood at the threshold of the tower scriptorium, holding a letter unopened for 3 days. It bore no seal, just a single handwritten phrase, "The last mirror will not fall by force." He handed the letter to Elise. "It's from R," she said, scanning the page. "They've gone deeper than we thought. Pharaoh's last enclave isn't on the border, it's beneath us, under the capital itself." Lucian frowned. "The catacombs?" "Deeper," Elise replied. "The forgotten web." Auric's expression tightened. He'd heard the name only once, as a child. It referred to a network of subterranean chambers and passages built during the founding wars, hidden tunnels meant to protect secrets too dangerous for the surface, or to bury them. He summoned Cedrin. The historian arrived, weary-eyed and ash-coated from transcribing the Echelon Codex's latest weave. "Is it real?" Auric asked. Cedrin didn't blink. "It's real, and if Pharaoh's remnant has claimed it, they're not just rewriting, they're rooting their truth beneath ours, changing the past by planting it under our feet." Auric made his decision quickly. No armies, no proclamations, only a small circle. Himself, Elise, Lucian, and 2 orphan readers who had once drawn maps for the hall, Kaelin and a quiet girl named Sarah, whose memory for turns and spaces was unmatched. They descended at dawn, through a sealed door behind the hall's eastern wall, down a stair so narrow it forced them single file. Torches flickered in the stale air. The scent of old water, rust, and dried ink filled the corridors. As they moved, the walls changed. First plain stone, then carved signs, names of towers long vanished, lines of forgotten poetry, and finally, symbols not of the realm, but of Pharaoh. An Ouroboros drawn in red, looping through a burning crown. They had found it. The entrance to the last mirror hall. It was not large, nor imposing. Just a single chamber, round, with a polished black stone at its center, curved like a lens. Not glass, not metal. Something else, something wrong. A figure stood beside it, clad in ash-gray robes, face bare, eyes tired. "R," Auric said. The figure nodded. "I told them you'd come. I told them you wouldn't bring swords." Lucian raised a brow. "Why are you still here?" R didn't smile. "Because I remember the old stories, not the Pharaoh versions, yours. I stayed to listen. He gestured to the mirror. "They've built something different here. It doesn't reflect what is. It shows what you fear to lose." Auric stepped forward. The mirror pulsed softly as he approached. For a moment, he saw it. His towers dark. His name forgotten. Varnov, a wasteland of ash and silent stone. Children huddled beside broken braziers, whispering that fire had once meant something. He stepped back. Elise placed a hand on his shoulder. "What do we do?" Auric turned to R. "You said it can't be destroyed by force." "No," R said, "but it can be emptied. It's filled by memory, by fear memory. If enough truth is spoken here, enough real presence, the reflection fades. The mirror cracks from the inside." Auric looked at the 2 orphan readers. Kaelin and Sarah nodded. One by one, they stepped into the circle and began to speak. Simple truths. Kaelin recited his first night in the hall, when he cried beside the archive lamps and was given bread by a stranger. Sarah told the story of a friend who had vanished during a tower collapse, and how she lit a lantern every month just in case he ever found the light again. Elise followed, speaking not of battle but of her mother, how she would braid her hair in the morning and whisper that courage wasn't in grand acts, but in showing up again and again. Lucian, ever silent, surprised them. He told of the day he almost left the kingdom, years ago, convinced no one remembered his name. Until a tower keeper called it out from across the river, just once. But it had been enough. Finally, Auric stepped forward. He placed both hands on the mirror and spoke quietly. "I am not the kingdom, I am only one voice, but I am the voice that stayed. I saw towers fall and chose to build again. I carry no perfect truth, only shared light. That's what they fear, not my rule, your remembrance, that we continue, that we tend the flame. The mirror shivered. A soft crack traced its edge, then another. The black surface rippled, once, then again, until it fractured entirely, like ice under weight. No explosion, no roar, just silence. And then, light. From beneath the shards, a soft golden glow rose. Not fire, memory. As if the mirror in its final breath had returned what it had stolen. R stepped back, tears in his eyes. It's done. They left the chamber in silence, the path behind them slowly collapsing, not from sabotage but from release. When they returned to the hall, the lamps glowed brighter. The dome above shimmered with new stories. And on the courtyard steps, without announcement, without planning, dozens of citizens had gathered. Each carried a single candle. They didn't chant. They didn't cheer. They just stood, present, together. And in that stillness, Auric finally understood. The kingdom had never been about the towers. It had always been about the light between them. The dawn after the mirror's collapse arrived with a stillness unlike any before. It wasn't the hush of fear or exhaustion. It was reverent, like the air after a long-held breath had finally been released. In Varnov, bells did not ring. No announcements were made. And yet across the realm, something shifted. The Flame Hall's great obsidian dome, once dimmed by the tension of unspoken fears, now reflected light with a quiet assurance. The woven tapestries on the walls, threads of memory sent from every village, seemed to pulse faintly, as though grateful to be seen, not just preserved. Auric did not call a council meeting that morning. Instead, he walked the lower halls alone, nodding to the keepers and scribes, stopping only to touch the edge of the echelon codex where it rested in its braided cradle. Voices had filled it, thousands, and now it was time to let them lead. Later that day, he climbed the outer watch platform of the hall, not to look outward toward enemies, but inward toward the people gathering slowly in the courtyard below. They came in quiet streams, farmers, artisans, tower lighters, children. No fanfare, no banners, just presence. Some carried lanterns. Others held fragments of their own stories, old letters, tokens, patches of fabric passed down through generations. At noon, without decree or instruction, the people formed a circle. Not of protest, not of prayer, of witness. Elise joined Auric above, her boots still carrying the dust of the forgotten web from the day before. They didn't come for a speech, she said softly. I know, Auric replied. Then what do we give them? He turned to her, his eyes clear. We give them the torch. That evening, a new rite was declared, not by proclamation, but by participation. Each person who had lit a tower, sung a flame song, or preserved a story would pass it to another. Not to train, not to test, just to share. The ritual would be called Passing the Flame, and on the night of its beginning, the capital stood completely dark. No torches, no lanterns, only the moon. Then, as the first voice whispered the words of an old lullaby once sung during the Reach's crisis, a tiny light flared in the courtyard. A match. It lit a candle. The candle was passed, one to another, and soon the entire courtyard shimmered not with one light, but hundreds, each unique, each offered freely. Auric stood among them, no crown on his head, no guards at his side, only a single flame in his palm. Kalen approached him, now taller, steadier, and held out his own. Auric lit it. The boy didn't bow. He simply smiled. Your turn, my lord. And Auric nodded. I've been waiting to pass this for a long time. In the following weeks, the kingdom entered what many began to call the Quiet Spring, a time without conquest, without decrees. The towers still signaled, the chorus still traveled, but the urgency had softened into stewardship. Auric refused to rebuild the broken pharaoh mirror chamber. Instead, he had it sealed and marked with a single stone, inscribed not with victory, but with thanks. To those who believe that memory matters, even when it hurt. New towers were built, not to replace old ones, but to expand the weave. They weren't all tall or grand. Some were little more than beacons on hillsides, built by families or villages, but each was added to the map. And at the heart of the Flame Hall, a second dome began construction. This one not of obsidian, but of glass. We've shown the world what we remember, Lucian said when construction began. Now let them see it. Elise designed its base to be open air, allowing wind and song to enter. Sarah, now apprenticed to the hall's lead scribe, suggested etching children's voices into the glass itself, tiny verses and questions carved along the ribs of the dome. They named it the Listening Sky. Visitors from beyond the realm began to arrive. Envoys who had once turned away during the pharaoh unrest now came seeking conversation. They brought their own stories. One woman, a scholar from the distant Sea of Knives, brought a tiny bone flute, claiming it held a song never written, only remembered. Another man, silent and covered in a mosaic of prayer beads, simply knelt before the flame hall and stayed for 3 days before leaving a single phrase carved in stone: "Your fire reminded me that I exist." Arik received every visitor without throne or ceremony. "Let them see the heart," he said, "not the crown." By midsummer, a new challenge emerged, not from outside, but from within. "What do we do?" Cedrin asked, "when the flame is no longer threatened?" Arik sat with the question for days, and on the 5th morning he answered, "We learn to carry it quietly, to let it warm, not blind, to listen, not just preserve, and to leave behind the tools of war, not in case of need, but in trust." He ordered the hall's armory to be transformed into a gallery of memory. Not weapons, but moments, recordings of past conflicts, letters written during crises, drawings from tower children sent in during the long silence. A sign was hung at the entrance. "This is not what we fought with. This is what we fought for." In time, children who had never known the fear of the pharaoh movement asked their parents why the towers were needed at all. And instead of replying with tales of darkness, the elders spoke of light, of unity, of choosing presence over comfort. And so, as the second dome neared completion and the stories within the Echelon Codex grew beyond what one hall could hold, Arik made one final change. He removed his name from every official inscription in the hall. He replaced it with a simple title, Keeper of Flame. And beneath it, "The light is not mine, it is ours. I was only tending it until you arrived." The glass dome was completed on a morning so clear that the sky itself seemed to step closer to the earth. Sunlight fell in long, gentle ribbons through the open arches, scattering across the floor of the new chamber like spilled gold. The final pane, etched with the voices of 15 children from every corner of the kingdom, was lowered into place by hand, not machine, as dozens stood in silent witness. They did not cheer, they simply breathed it in. The dome had no throne, no altar, no guarded platform. Its center was empty, save for a wide, low circle of woven stone. It was meant for sitting, for gathering, for hearing each other. Arik watched from the outer walkway as the first group of visitors entered, a family from the northern ridges, a weathered couple from the eastern riverlands, a pair of monks carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle that turned out to be a story kite, a child's memory stitched with verses about watching tower lights from a rooftop. Kalon, now apprenticed to the dome's steward, guided them gently, inviting them not to look but to speak. The dome was a place not to be awed by, but added to. Every voice would echo here, briefly, then fade, but not vanish. Instead, each sound was absorbed into the lattice, converted into pulses that shimmered faintly in the glass, barely visible unless one looked closely. The dome remembered every syllable, not as record, but as presence. The capital changed. No longer defined by looming halls and defensive towers, it softened around the new center. Markets began opening earlier and staying open later, as if drawn by the quiet peace of the glass dome's glow. New homes were built not around courtyards or walls, but around listening spaces. Fire pits, conversation benches, song gardens. They called this shift the turning. The people turned, not away from the past, but toward each other. Arik, too, turned. He no longer sat at the high seat in the flame hall. He slept in a modest room within the dome's outer ring. He walked daily among the people, dressed in gray, always with a small notebook in his pocket, listening. One morning, he found a boy sitting alone by the dome's edge, clutching a worn strip of cloth. "May I sit?" Arik asked. The boy nodded without looking up. After a quiet moment, the boy said, "It belonged to my brother. He used to draw flames on everything, even his shoes. He was a tower lighter in the Saltlands." Arik waited. "He died during the long silence, but I never saw a flame go out, just disappear." The The boy looked up, his eyes wet. Did it matter? Arik nodded slowly. Yes. because you still carry it. He handed the boy a small matchstick from his pocket. Not to burn, just to remember. The boy didn't light it, he just held it. And that was enough. Later that week, Auric gathered his closest companions, Elise, Lucien, Cedrin, Sarah, and Kaelin, for what he called the final mapping. On a long wooden table, they laid out every known tower, every light circle, every dome and village that had participated in the Great Weave. "It's time we stop calling them towers," Auric said. Lucien raised an eyebrow. "What then? Beacons?" "No, that's still something we look at. I want something we stand within, something that reminds us these places are not just warning posts, they're homes of meaning." Cedrin traced his finger along the old map lines. "Then what do we call them?" Auric smiled. "Hearths." The words spread slowly but naturally. Villages repainted signs, old tower ledgers were renamed hearth logs. The realm no longer thought in terms of signal lines and defense grids, but of warmth, connection, story. The Echelon Codex, now too large for a single space, was unbraided into 6 major threads, each one sent to a different region, carried in glass cases built to resonate with voice. And so the Codex became not a single object, but a living constellation. One day, Auric received a small package from the coastal outpost of Malwyn. Inside was a piece of driftwood, carved with a child's messy handwriting. "I heard the flame when I was sick. It said my name. I'm better now. I wanted to give it back." There was no name, just the note. He placed it in the glass dome center. Years passed. New voices rose. And one by one, those who had lit the first flames began to step aside. Not in retreat, but in trust. Elise took to the road again, now as a traveling story gatherer. Lucien returned to his village, where he started a school for boys who preferred silence to swordplay. Cedrin, ever the recorder, published The Quiet Flame, a woven reflection on the years of rebuilding. And Auric, he wrote less, spoke less, but his presence deepened. People called him Keeper Still, but with affection, not reverence. He laughed easily, sat at evening fire circles, and listened, always listened. One evening, as twilight painted the dome in violet hues, Kellen, now grown, approached him. "The people want to know when you'll write your story." Auric chuckled. "They already did. It's everywhere. In you, in this dome, in the silence that holds more meaning than any speech I could give." Keelan smiled. "Still, they'd like to read it." Auric looked around the dome, then up at the shimmering threads of remembered voices. He nodded. "Then let's write it together, not as history, as invitation." And so, in the twilight of his years, Auric began a final project. Not alone, but with hundreds. Not titled Chronicles of a King, but simply Flamekeeper, a telling by many, because the fire had never been his. He had only tended it until others came to carry it forward. Autumn arrived gently that year. The leaves along the outer walls of Varnov turned not with fury, but with grace. Deep reds, honey golds, and soft browns folding quietly into the city's streets, as if the realm itself were exhaling. Within the glass dome, a new rhythm had begun to settle. Each week, a rotating group of citizens hosted evenings of echo, nights when anyone could enter, light a single candle, and share something that mattered. A memory, a promise, a moment of loss or joy. There were no requirements, no introductions, only presence. It was in one of these evenings that a young girl, no older than 10, stepped into the center carrying a cracked wooden flute. She didn't speak, she simply played a short tune, hesitant, uneven, unfinished. But the dome listened. And when she stepped away, leaving the flute behind, Auric picked it up and placed it on the small stone ledge that had come to be known as the Table of Carried Things, a place for offerings not of wealth, but of weight. That night, the glass above shimmered faintly in time with the notes she had played. Auric, sitting quietly near the edge, watched as more people began to leave objects behind. A fragment of a scarf, a stone smoothed by the sea. A journal page with a line scratched out and replaced with a word that simply read, "Again." He realized then that this, more than anything he had designed or ordered, was the true mark of healing. Not the retelling of triumphs, but the willingness to leave behind things unfinished, imperfect, true. One morning, as early frost curled along the base of the dome, Kellen brought him a scroll sealed in green wax. It came from the borderlands, he said, handing it over with quiet urgency. A new settlement. Orek broke the seal and read in silence. The scroll was from a place called Thorn's Edge, a small cluster of homes where 3 tower lines once intersected and had been lost during the Pharaoh years. No light had reached them in over a decade. But the message was clear. We did not vanish. We built hearths from memory, not blueprint. And now we wish to return, not as a forgotten outpost, but as a beginning. Attached was a small braid of cloth, dyed in the colors of dawn, deep indigo, muted lavender, and pale orange. Cedrin, who had joined them during the reading, placed a hand on the scroll. They lit their own fire, he said softly. Orek nodded. Then let's walk toward it. A delegation was assembled, not of officials, but of listeners, elders, children, builders, singers, a weaving circle, they called it, and Orek went with them. It took 6 days on foot to reach Thorn's Edge. When they arrived, they found a village unlike any other. There were no towers, no flags, only stone rings, simple hearths at the center of every road, every home, every crossing. In them, flames flickered gently, tended not for light but for conversation. And along the pathways, small stones bore carvings. What do you carry? What do you leave? What do you pass? Orek met the people not as king, but as guest. They did not bow. They welcomed him with open hands and questions. That evening, as the village gathered at the central circle, a young woman named Naira stepped forward. She carried a worn lantern made of bone and glass. It was passed down from a time before I was born, she said. We never knew who made it, only that it still lit. We called it the Eye. And when all else was dark, we placed it in the center and we sat. We didn't speak of power. We spoke of presence. That is how we survived. She handed the lantern to Orek. He held it carefully, feeling its weight, and in that moment, he made a decision. When the delegation returned to Varnov, a new section was added to the Echelon Codex's outer braid, not of official messages or tower records, but of unbroken absence. Stories that had continued without the signal, without the dome. They called it the Echo Thread. And over the following months, more villages came forward, not seeking to be rejoined or restored, but to weave their own truths into the shared light. Some had followed old oral chants that predated the realm. Others had passed down lullabies through dances, not words. One community had kept history by mapping it into trees, each ring a memory, each scar a decision. Orek stood often in the glass dome now, simply listening to these arrivals. He no longer guided the sessions. He simply bore witness. And with each new story, each new thread added to the echo braid, the dome's light shifted, no longer just flame-hued. It began to pulse with shades unseen before. Moonlight gray, forest dusk, deep river blue, as though the fire had learned to hold the colors of silence. One day, while walking alone in the outer gardens of the dome, Orek came upon a girl drawing symbols in the frost with her finger. When she noticed him, she asked, "Are you the one who started the towers?" He smiled. "I helped relight them." She thought for a moment. "Do they still need you?" He paused. "No. And that's what tells me they're strong." She nodded and returned to her drawings. Later, Orek recorded the moment in his small leather journal. His handwriting had grown slower, more curved, but his words were clear. "The flame never belonged to me, but I am its witness still. And as long as one person remembers, one breath, one song, one mark in frost, the light continues." Winter approached again, but there was no fear, only preparation. People gathered not in dread, but in warmth. Fire circles expanded, stories grew longer. The Codex's threads shimmered with new colors, new names. And Orek, standing once more beneath the dome, placed his final journal page upon the table of carried things. It bore only a single sentence. "Let the next voice begin." Then he stepped back and listened. The first snow of that winter did not fall, but drifted like it had forgotten where it meant to land. It swirled gently through the arches of the glass dome, dusting the stone floor with a shimmer so light it could have been imagined. And for once, no one rushed to sweep it away. Within the dome, a quiet ceremony had begun, one with no formal name, no robes, no torches. Just people, gathering at dusk as they had now done every year, like to mark the beginning of the cold season with stories. This year, the youngest voice chosen to speak was a boy named Jorn, 9 years old. Red scarf, shoes too big for his feet, and a letter in his hands. He unfolded the paper carefully and read aloud. My mother said, fire doesn't only live in wood, it lives in remembering. So if I remember her when she used to sing to me during snowstorms, then she's still here, right? That's what I wanted to say. No one applauded. They simply nodded. One elder reached forward, not to speak, but to light a tiny candle at the boy's feet. Others followed. Within minutes, a new ring of flame encircled the boy, low, flickering, gentle. Jorn whispered a thank you and returned to his seat, beaming, not from pride, but from being part of something he had once only watched. Auric watched from the side, cloaked in gray, his beard now silvered, his walk slower. But his eyes remained unchanged. Clear, present, steady. Keelan approached. The builders from Westmarch arrived this morning, he said softly. They brought a new kind of glass, one that holds warmth even in the bitter winds. They say it hums when light touches it. Auric smiled. A singing window. I like that. They want to build another dome, Keelan added. Not to copy this one, but to reflect it. In the Highlands, for those who can't make the journey. Auric nodded. Good. Let it be theirs, with new colors, a new center. Keelan hesitated, then asked, and you, will you go see it? Auric looked toward the snow drifting in from above. I don't think I need to, he said. I've already seen it, in every hearth that stayed lit, in every song that traveled. I'm not a flame that moves anymore. I'm the ember that stays. Keelan didn't argue. He simply reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle of papers. They're your stories, he said, the ones you wrote, the ones you didn't finish. Auric raised an eyebrow. Keelan chuckled. I pieced them together from the Listening Sky archive. It wasn't easy. You left a lot out. I trusted someone would fill the rest, Auric said quietly. Keelan handed him the bundle. On the front page, a simple title, Auric, Not the King. Auric laughed. Did I approve that? No, but it's true. He read a line aloud from the first page. I was never meant to rule forever, only long enough for others to remember they didn't need ruling at all. He paused. That's good. You wrote it. Auric looked up. Did I? Keelan grinned. Maybe. Or maybe someone else did, and you just kept it safe. That night, Auric made his way slowly to the courtyard behind the dome. A smaller circle of stones waited there, once used for tower drills, now home to garden beds and music benches. He sat down. The stars above were unusually bright. He reached into his coat and pulled out the matchstick the boy Jorn had lit earlier. It had gone cold now, but Auric held it anyway. Still a flame, he whispered, and he began to write again. Not for legacy, not for records, just to hold the warmth a little longer. Days passed, then weeks. The snow deepened but never hardened. Paths were cleared each morning by children, eager to race ahead and mark the trails for neighbors. The sky was often overcast, but soft, not heavy. The kingdom did not sleep through winter now. It moved more slowly, but it moved. The Flame Hall, once the center of every decision, now served as a place of learning, of gathering, of rest. Its great dome was opened one final time before the deepest cold set in. And in that opening, a group of young students laid a new stone in the floor. Not for a ruler, not even for Auric, for the people. The inscription read, We do not carry fire to lead, we carry it to see each other better. Auric watched the stone be placed from a window above, wrapped in blankets, sipping something warm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence had become its own kind of story. One morning, near the final turning of winter, Elise returned. She had aged too, but the same spark remained in her voice, in the sharp tilt of her brow. I've seen every tower turned hearth, she said, embracing Auric, even the ones we forgot. And? He asked. They remembered us in their own way, through scent, through rhythm, through names passed on. The weave held. Auric smiled, deeply moved. Then we did it. No, Elise said gently. They did. She placed something beside his seat. It was a lantern, old, familiar, the same one he had once passed to a village girl during the long silence. I found it, Elise said. She passed it on, to many, and someone returned it to the circle. Auric held it in his hands. It still worked, not brightly, but enough. Then maybe I'll pass it on again, he said. Elise nodded. I think you already have. They sat together a long time that day. No words, just warmth. And as night came and the snow fell again like soft memory, the people of the realm lit their hearths, not because they had to, because they chose to, in honor, in gratitude, in light. And the flame still burned. The wind in early spring carried with it the scent of thawed earth and pine. Trees stood like sentinels, shaking off their icy coats, while rivers whispered with renewed motion. In Varnov, the glass dome no longer glowed solely at night. It shimmered all day, reflecting the changing skies, bending sunlight into gentle spectrums that danced along the floor like silent songs. Aurek rose early that morning. He no longer kept to a schedule, but he followed a rhythm, one shaped not by duty but by intention. His steps were slower now, but deliberate, each footfall echoing faintly across the stone corridor that led from his small chamber to the heart of the dome. There, he met Sarah. Once a quiet mapmaker, now a storyteller and steward of memory. She had grown into her voice over the years, not loud, but precise, with a stillness that made listeners lean closer. You're up early, she said, offering him a cup of brewed leaf tea. Aurek nodded. The light felt different today. She looked toward the arched ceiling. There's a whisper in the wind. It's almost time. For what? Sarah smiled softly. For the turning, not of the season, of the story. Later that morning, he sat by the central ring, once a place for formal announcements, now a hearth space where anyone could simply sit and be seen. Around him, the city stirred. Visitors from the borderlands arrived bearing hand-woven cloths marked with family symbols. A group of children played echo games, speaking a word at one end of the dome and racing to hear it repeated in the acoustics from the far wall. Elise joined him as the midday sun filtered through the high arches. They're starting to ask, she said. About what? About after. What comes when the last fire you tend is no longer yours to tend? Aurek looked down at his hands. They had built walls, drawn maps, carried torches. Now they trembled slightly, not with fear, but with readiness. I've passed the flame, he said, but I've yet to step away from its warmth. Elise placed a hand on his. Maybe it's time you watch it from the outside, see how it moves without you standing in its center. Aurek breathed in deeply. He didn't speak right away. That evening, the city gathered for the equinox weaving, an annual tradition where every community sent a single representative to share something, a story, a token, a sound, or even a moment of silence. The thread would then be woven into the codex, and the codex updated in the glasswork that rimmed the dome's upper curve. Kellen read the opening line. To remember is to shape time. To share is to carry it forward. To listen is to belong. Dozens came forward. An elderly woman offered a baked seed cake wrapped in the linen of her mother's apron, untouched since the Reaches War. A young boy recited a one-word poem, again. A weaver from the southern ridge brought a blanket that had warmed 5 generations, dyed with tears and soot and berries. Finally, silence fell. Aurek stood. He held in his hand no object, no scroll, only a small flame lit from the hearth beside him. I have nothing left to offer, he said. The hall remained quiet. Because everything I once carried has already been passed to you, to this place, to the dome above us and the stones beneath. I came to tend the fire, but I stayed because you showed me it belonged to all of us. He lowered the flame into a new lantern, one carved by the children of the borderland village of Brindle Hollow, its glass ringed with small fingerprints from the hands that made it. This, he said, is my last light. Not because I've faded, but because you haven't. Then he stepped away from the circle and into the people, no longer keeper, only witness. In the days that followed, something extraordinary happened. The dome began to glow even when no flame was present. Visitors noticed first, faint pulses of light along the edges like heartbeats. Then whispers followed. The dome was remembering the voices spoken within it. The stories had formed not only memory, but presence. Scholars called it the luminous echo. Poets called it the breath that stayed. Children simply said, it's alive. And so the dome became more than space. It became response. When a traveler sat alone in sorrow, the light near them would flicker gently, golden and slow. When a family arrived singing, the glass above would bend color in rhythm. When no one spoke at all, it shimmered with blue-gray calm, like a breath held between moments. Arek began to walk less, speak less. But people still came to sit beside him, not to ask, but to be with. And one evening, as the stars swelled wide over the hills, a group of children approached him with a question. "Can you tell us the first time you saw the flame?" He thought for a long time, then answered, "It wasn't the biggest fire. It wasn't in a tower or hall. It was a single match in the hands of someone scared. And when they struck it, they smiled. That's when I knew it wasn't about fire. It was about hope, warmth, presence, and that it could be shared." They sat with him for a while, and then one by one left small things behind. A smooth river stone, a piece of string, a cracked acorn, a breath held in silence. And Orek, holding those things in his palm, closed his eyes and smiled, because the flame, it had never needed tending, only reminding. And the people, they remembered. The morning of Orek's final walk began without fanfare. No bells, no proclamations. Only the quiet hush of early light stretching across rooftops and into courtyards, where hearths had already begun to flicker awake. Birds sang in the distance, not loudly, but with the unhurried confidence of a world that no longer braced itself for sirens or smoke. In the glass dome, a breeze slipped in from the west and wove itself between the stone benches. Sarah arrived first, placing a folded cloth on the center platform. Then Keelan carrying the small lantern from Brindle Hollow. One by one they came, not as leaders or witnesses, but as kin, a circle of those who had shaped the weave. Elise stood beside Orek as he watched the sky slowly brighten above the dome's arch. "Are you sure?" Orek nodded. "I've been walking for decades. Today I stop walking to lead and start walking to listen from the edge." He wore no ceremonial robe, no markings of title. Just the same weathered gray cloak he'd worn for years, now patched by hands from every region of the realm. The path he chose was not toward the Flame Hall or the archives, but out of Varnov, toward the ridge trail that bordered the northern horizon. Along the way, villagers waited quietly, not to halt him, but to walk with him for a time. Children handed him drawings. Elders offered small bundles of herbs or folded songs. One young boy placed a pebble in his hand and whispered, "For remembering." The pebble stayed in Orek's hand the whole way. As he crossed the final stone bridge that marked the boundary of the capital, Orek paused. He turned to the gathered crowd behind him, hundreds by now, and lifted the lantern once more. "I leave not because I am finished," he said, "but because you have begun." He handed the lantern to Kellen. "Let this never be kept in one place too long. Let it move." Then he turned, alone now, and walked down the quiet ridge trail where spring flowers poked through old frost and birds swooped between cedar trees. No one followed, not because they were told not to, but because they understood. Some journeys are meant to be walked in solitude, even when they are for everyone. Back in the capital, something new was happening. At the heart of the dome, Sarah, Lucian, and Keelan unfurled the final braid of the codex. It had no title page, only a blank panel, and on it the people would now write, not in ink, but with light, voice, presence. They renamed it The Ongoing Flame. No longer was it just a record, it became an invitation. Villages across the realm received word of Orek's walk and began creating echo stones, small memory markers shaped from local stone and embedded with fragments of story glass. These stones were not shrines, they were resting places for thoughts, dreams, confessions. One could sit beside an echo stone and speak a name, tell a story, or simply breathe. Each one shimmered faintly when touched, as though listening. A new map began to form. Not a political map, not a military one, a map of remembering. It showed where grief had turned into song, where silence became sanctuary, where light was not just lit, but shared. Months passed. The rhythm of the realm held steady, markets pulsed with color and sound. Travelers came not to seek refuge, but to offer it. The glass dome remained open, always. And the lantern of Brindle Hollow, it moved, hand to hand, hearth to hearth, not as a relic, as a reminder. One spring day, a young girl named Lynette arrived in Varnov, carrying a journal. She had never met Arek, She was born after the Pharaoh collapse. Her father had once lit tower signals. Her mother kept weather records. She sat in the dome, opened the journal, and began to read. I was told that long ago there was a man who didn't fight the fire with more fire. He listened to it. He shaped it gently. He let it teach us how to see. I don't want to fight either. I want to listen. She left the journal at the center ring. Next to it, she placed a seed, an acorn. No one moved it. It sprouted 3 weeks later, and the dome adjusted. A small circle of soil was added. The oak grew, slowly, with dignity, just like the flame. Years turned. Sarah became the first listener, a role not of control but of care. Kellen traveled, carrying the lantern and tending new hearths. Lucian taught, Elise wandered, Cedrin wrote. The children of tower lighters became builders of story spaces and dome singers. And the codex? It kept growing, not linearly, not chronologically, but organically. Some threads looped back, some spiraled outward, some simply paused, letting silence fill in the meaning. The light in the dome pulsed in rhythm with the seasons, and every now and then someone would ask, "Do you think RX still walks?" To which someone else might reply, "No, I think he rests," or "I think he listens," or "I think he's become part of the trail." And all those answers would be true. Because RX had never sought to be remembered, he sought to help others remember themselves. On the 50th equinox weaving, a girl stepped into the center of the dome and recited a single line, "When I am afraid, I light a story." And the dome glowed, not just gold, but violet, green, deep blue. Then the people quietly, one by one, lit their own lights. No instructions, no speeches, just light and warmth and belonging. And so the flame continued, not as a monument, as a movement, not as a memory, as a presence. And that was enough. If you've made it all the way here, thank you. Truly. You didn't just listen to a story tonight, you became part of it. Every flame lit in this tale, every quiet moment, every whispered promise, it lives on in those who carry it forward. And now I'd love to hear from you. What part of this journey stayed with you the most? Was it Oryx's final walk, the lantern that never stayed in one place? Or maybe, just maybe, it was that tiny acorn in the middle of the dome. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts, your reflections, or simply the part that made you feel something. I read every word because your voice matters in this circle. And if this quiet corner of the internet brought a bit of warmth into your night, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep telling stories like this, slow burning, human, timeless. Until our next journey together, may your fire stay steady, may your silence be kind, and may your story always find someone listening. Take care, sleep well, and I'll see you in the next tale.